Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the regularly scheduled board meeting for Wednesday, February 28th. Before we begin, I would like to recognize that this meeting is taking place on the unceded territories of the Quetzin, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Liaxin, Palkachin, Dididat, and Pachidat nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. Also want to show respect and recognition of the large group that's gathered to join our meeting today. And I just want to express both my concern and my support for the challenges that we're all going throughout the region. We are all community members and neighbors in this region, and we share so many different challenges with the pressures of inflation, cost of living, and unfortunately, as we see all too often in local government, these challenges are often compounded or exponential to those that we face in our households. That being said, I also want to recognize that many of us are sitting in here today with our pink shirts on, and that this is Anti-Bullying Day. And all that we ask is when you give your input today and share your concerns, that you do it in a respectful and civil manner. We are all neighbors in this region. We all live here. We are all facing different challenges as we try and navigate our way through what is a really difficult time for folks. So I want to hear from all of you. I know our colleagues do. And to that end, we will be extending the public input to the maximum under our bylaws, which is up to 30 minutes. We have taken a speakers list here, and then we do have a delegation coming forward to speak to the concerns as well. That being said, I think we can get the meeting underway. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Robbins. I'm the corporate officer. The first order of business is the motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. There are no changes.
With no changes to the agenda, I'll look for a motion to adopt as presented. Moved by Director Istash, seconded by Director Staples. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Mr. Robbins.
Recommendation that the minutes of the regular board meeting of February 8th, 2024 be adopted.
If there are no errors or omissions, a motion to adopt the minutes moved by Director Justice, seconded by Director McGonigal. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.
And recommendation that the minutes of the regular board meeting of February 14th, 2024 be adopted.
Again, if there are no errors or omissions, a motion to adopt the minutes moved by Director Toporowski, seconded by Director Douglas. All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Mr. Robbins.
Business arising from the minutes, and I realize that, Mr. Chair, under your report RC1, you will be bringing back the motion that I'm just about to, just for those that are in the gallery and those that are following along, just to give you an idea of what has arisen from the February 8th meeting, and this is the subject of the chair's report. And so if I just might read, motion number 24078, that the board reconsider regional park land funding motion from the February 8th, 2024 regular meeting of the board was ruled to require a 2/3 majority vote to pass. The recorded vote showed 10 in favor, 6 opposed. Under the ruling, this motion failed. The ruling that a vote to reconsider a motion requires a 2/3 majority was in error. Generally, a vote to reconsider a motion requires a simple majority only. However, as resolution number 24-078 was with respect to a financial matter, it should have been a weighted corporate vote. The chair, with his authority under section 131 of the community charter, as outlined in the chair's report under section 6, as I indicated, is requesting that motion 24076, that the Cowichan Valley Regional District fund the Regional Parkland Acquisition Fund Function 285 to the full amount of $2,474,730 be reconsidered. With that.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. With that, that takes us to public input period. We do have a large number of speakers, and we do have a limit under our procedures bylaw. I'm going to ask first for a motion to extend public input. Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Segal. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Mr. Robbins, I believe that does require a 2/3 majority?
Correct.
It passed unanimously. Motion carries. So that extends our public input to the maximum of 30 minutes. Sir, if you do not raise your sign, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Can you please put your sign down? We don't allow... Sir, just show a little respect. We can see what it says, and I'll say for the record, it says you are accountable. And thank you very much. We are all accountable. including individuals, for our actions. Thank you. Thank you. We do have a large number of people registered for public input, and we do have a maximum under our procedures bylaw now of 30 minutes. So we do allow up to 3 minutes per speaker, but I'm going to ask if you can keep it briefer to allow everyone on the speakers list an opportunity to come forward, that you keep your comments as brief as possible. And I'm going to ask Mr. Robbins to reflect on what I think I've already said, but just sort of our rules and procedures around public input period, Mr. Robbins.
Yes, just a gentle reminder that the speaker should comment in a polite, calm, and courteous manner using respectful language, civility, and decorum. And with this, in no particular order, and as I went out into the gallery just to see who would wish to speak, I jotted down names, and again, in no particular order. I have first on my list that I created Lynn Smith.
Welcome, Ms. Smith. Mrs. Smith, hi, nice to see you. And just make sure you turn on the microphone. You know how that one works.
Thank you all today for being here and listening to us. I would like to bring forward the Saltaire Recreation Function 456 loan of $261,600. You know, we've often heard the chair say to all of you that it's really important not to make decisions on the fly. You require documents to support your decisions, and unfortunately, on the 8th of February, there was no documentation to support your decisions. We know that the board is accountable for good governance, best practices, due diligence, transparency, and fiduciary duty for taxpayers. I ask that you rescind that motion, and we'd like you to know that there has been no long-term financial sustainability plan for this building. It was bought in 2014, and we're still waiting. We've had a couple of short-term loans. One was for a high-efficiency heat pump system, and somehow it ended up being gas. We've got a 20,000 square foot uninsulated roof on a 1950s and 1970s building. That doesn't seem to be environmentally friendly or appropriate in today's world. We also came forward with a petition asking that the CVRD conduct a referendum for Saltaire voters to establish if residents do or do not support taxpayers' taxation or grant funds being spent on the restoration, renewal, repair of the Saltaire Community Centre. We brought that forward here to an EASC meeting, and somehow it has disappeared. So I think that, you know, before a 5-year short-term loan is authorized by the board, we as a community would like to see some accountability and transparency with a long-term financial sustainability plan for this building. There's still a lot to be done. So the Saltaire community has asked to be heard multiple times with regards to the Saltaire Community Centre restoration, renewal, repairs, costs, and funding. I ask that the board rescind the 8th of February board motion with regards to the $281,600 loan, and that the CVRD board make a motion to direct staff to provide the community with a long-term financial sustainability plan for this building. Thank you for not making decisions on the fly.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. We will go to our next speaker. I do want to remind folks, it looks like we have about 15 speakers. If everybody takes 3 minutes, we're not going to get through the list. And we've just used up our first 3 minutes. So to our next speaker, Mr. Robbins.
I have Joyce Benson.
Just make sure the microphone's on, Joyce. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Board of Directors. Thank you. So, taxes. Not sure how many people know that CVRD tax increase is like a front and center, great big alarm bell, okay? All it's doing is it's epitomizing what we're already dealing with and what we're already facing day by day. And I'm just going to use a really quick example of our local citizen newspaper. Last year, from January the 26th to the end of August, 7 months, I was paying attention, and the first one that caught my eye was the Crofton Mill. $18.8 million taxpayer money going to the Crofton Mill, owned by Anasia Pulp and Paper, Paper Excellence, and $4.5 million from the BC NDP, $14.3 from the federal Liberals and NDP. And I looked at that and I thought, when did we become investors and shareholders in a foreign corporation? So $18.8 million supposedly to save jobs, of which it has not managed to do. That was my first alarm bell. Then I noted $3 million taxes to destroy the Cowichan Bay estuary, to flood it and remove dikes and destroy farmland. I thought, whoa, this is getting serious, it's farming. $12 million for 4 SPCA shelters in BC, $1 million going to the Cowichan SPCA, and this is to make a special training center to help dogs be more adoptable. Never mind the people that are in our streets struggling
Sorry,
with
Ms. Benson, this is
Yes.
on items on our agenda.
Oh,
I
yes,
haven't
it
heard-
is. It's about taxation increases.
Okay,
Oh,
none
okay.
of these are local
So-
government taxation.
But we're paying it all. That's my point. We're
Okay,
paying it all.
That's a pretty
Okay.
tenuous connection. Please
Yeah, well,
continue.
no, sorry, but like I'm saying, these add up to $90 million, okay, just saying, $90 million taxes on our heads, $30 million to festivals and events, including $250,000 to Sunfest, $18 million to a childcare facility behind North Cowichan, $7 million to Shawnigan Easter Seal Camp as part of a $25 million upgrade. The one that gets me too is the fact that North Cowichan taxpayers already are being charged a 0.5%, carbon tax for 10 years. They collect $190,000. We're paying a carbon tax at the local level, provincial, and the federal. That's what I'm trying to portray here is 19.33. When I sat on council at North Cowichan, our goal was 2% increase. Maybe if it had to go up to 3%. Now, North Cowichan's up at 5.18, and you folks are looking way high up to 20%. What I'm saying is it's all relevant because we're paying it all. And I'm concerned about our children and their children. And I'm only 5th generation Cowichan Valley, but my daughter's having a baby in May, first one, and I care. And little Wyatt that was out front here today representing a farming family, I care. So irresponsibility seems to be running rampant in government, and there's so many more examples of the misspend of our tax dollars, and it's wrong, it's unfair, and it hurts. Thank you.
Thanks, and congratulations on, folks.
Thank you. I forgot one thing. Nigel Dinsdale, he said, just
Ms.
remember,
Benson,
everybody
your
sitting at the
time's
table,
up.
we remember who voted for what today.
So I would encourage you also to take those arguments to your federal and provincial government where they rightly belong. Thank you. We have next on our speakers list, Mr. Robbins.
I have Jack McLeod.
Welcome, Mr. McLeod. You know where the button is.
Second time, so now I'm getting better at this. So sorry. So I'd like to recognize the chair and the directors. My name is Jack McLeod, and I'm represent Land Keepers. Directors and staff here at the CVRD should be ashamed to pass a motion raising taxes on CVRD residents by almost 20%. You cannot keep raising taxes to feed your spending habits, which are totally out of control. Stop buying parkland. Our whole island is a park. Within 15 minutes, wherever you live, you are in a park-like setting. Remember, when you buy a park, it doesn't stop there. It requires more money for equipment, labor, maintenance, and operation, which increases tax paid by all of us. Stop building million-dollar trails where our tourist and industry flourishes on its own right now. No need to charge or change garbage collection business that gives us good service to people who are already happy with it, especially to replace it with some costing 3 times as much for the residents. CVRD will spend time and money buying new equipment, but we will be paying for it in more taxes. No need to buy million-dollar private water systems when local private sector companies can do the job. If a private sector owner wants to remove or leave his job, he can sell it to another private sector. They're therefore avoiding more CVRD taxes. All these moves make the need for more taxes. It is time the CVRD looks in-house for the money needed. The CVRD and staff are out of control. It's time to reduce the size of the regional district and operations. CVRD should go back to operating government instead of buying more private sector operations to acquire more control and raise taxes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. McLeod. Hey, folks, I really don't want to cut the process short. Just let people speak, and we'll all hear them well. No need for neither nor applause nor jeers. I hear. Pardon me? Oh, I know. Mr. Robbins.
I have Adriana Richards.
Hello. Good afternoon, Chair and Directors. I'm here representing thousands of COPE Inc. members who are fiercely against your proposed tax hikes during this recession. Area Director Nicholson indicated in a letter that the only wiggle room you seem to have was on the Park Acquisition Fund. However, when going back over budget pieces presented by the staff, there was a lot more that could have been voted against, such as the approximate $100 million for the active transportation plan, to name one of many. Additionally, Director Nicholson said the cost of living began rising steeply in 2021, and while it is coming down somewhat, it's still higher than pre-pandemic. The cost of living is far from coming down. It's continually going up with higher and higher carbon taxes, new taxes, costs of food through the roof, due to large part the green policies, cost of electricity, and so on. Much of this is beyond your control, of course, but the core 10.35 rise by you even before the park acquisition is. The proposed budget, expenditure, and reserve funds are out of control, as is your general government reserve fund. Frankly, if your CAO cannot have their staff meet targets of a standard 3 to 4% tax increase by cutting staff and doing whatever it takes, then it's your job to look at the position and evaluate their performance. It's well known that the richer and the more prosperous a nation is, the more parks and reserve land they have. We ask whether the Economic Development Commission has been able to present to the board the actual numbers of people now using the food bank in the valley, the declining value of the Canadian dollar, and have they presented on geographical, geopolitical and struggles that may have given you the feel for the room that bloating the Park Reserve Fund, the Environmental Services Fund, and the Environmental Initiatives Fund may just not be the priorities for the taxpayers currently. One of the excuses for taxpayers to place almost $100,000 per year into the Park Acquisition Fund was that the CVRD had lost out on buying land that came up for sale. Were these lands sold to a taxpayer who will give back to the community instead? Is the CVRD in the business of land acquisition, or is it in the business of providing the best possible services to the taxpayer, of which these services are shockingly low in comparison to other jurisdictions? We hear the same placating words from all local governments. It's only a little number here and a little number there. In the end, it just means more fees on top of new fees like curbside that all add up. When you see 3,000 residents sign a petition against your tax hike, a feat that the CVRD has yet to reach through their so-called public engagement platforms, it should indicate a fierce backlash that you may not be in line with your constituents' priorities, i.e., if properly pulled, a park on the gravel pit would not be a priority. As constituents tighten their belts, they only expect their local governments to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to remind folks, we are going to run out of time if folks maximize the time. So if we can get as many people through, we're hopeful that we can give everyone on the list an opportunity to speak.
I have Ruth Waddell.
Sorry. Good afternoon, Chair, corporate bureaucrats, and elected directors. My name's Ruth Waddell, and I am a long-term resident in the Cowichan Valley and raised my sons here. I have many questions for you. Are you aware of the massive protests occurring throughout the Western world? Do you know that citizens are arising in the millions against non-elected global influencers that have been dictating local policy? Are you aware that Cowichan Valley residents now have done extensive research and now know CVRD's relationships with groups such as ICLEI and the WF and stakeholder groups they're working with locally? CVRD is a member of ICLEI, a non-government agency that works with local governments to create systemic change. They work through the multiple stakeholder partnerships locally, such as the Transition Network. Many elected directors align with one or more of those organizations, and I'm wondering if any of you would be willing to let us all know which organizations you align with. Are you aware that at present, 62% of BC residents' income now is spent on taxes and government fees? Are you aware that the provincial government supports the escalating carbon tax that will be increased to 17 cents per litre on fuel starting April 1st, along with a 2.3% increase in our hydro? Starting June 1st, we're looking at a BC minimum wage increase of $17.40 per hour. How do you think these increases will affect costs to residents and put further burden on struggling local businesses? Do you have a strategy that will create jobs to offset the job loss from local businesses and our dying industries? Are you aware that the only sector that is experiencing job creation is the public sector at all levels? Do you propose those jobs will be funded as the tax base is declined? How will they be funded? An increasing number of citizens believe the CVRD is driving us out of our homes and off our private land. Political will is shifting. Changes in government will hopefully investigate the operations of the local governments who are in lockstep province-wide. CVRD assured the taxpayers last year that the 2024 budget would adhere to a 3.5% increase. A recent letter in our local citizen newspaper from an author, Nadine Laman, said, called for the resignation of this regional board, either due to incompetence or corruption.
Mr. Robbins.
Mr. Chair, we did have somebody register online, a Mr. Connor Whalen, and I see that he has joined us. I wonder if he can make himself known. Mr. Whalen, are you there?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I support the petition that has been raised. I'm opposed to this motion or contemplation of this horrendous tax increase. We are in an inflationary economy. We have a housing crisis, a homeless crisis. You pay $50 for a bag of groceries. Some seniors, I've read reports, are not able to pay their property taxes, and they have to defer them. The food banks, the thrift stores, are all doing a thriving business because of this economy. This is the worst possible time to be contemplating something like this. And I'm strongly opposed to it. The Fraser Institute just issued a study where the BC budget is going to rise to over a $7 billion deficit. Municipal, provincial, federal governments have got to learn to live within their means, the same way a household does. This is not proper stewardship of our tax money. And the other questions that I had that weren't answered, and I direct this to the chairman. He's quoted in a Cowichan Valley report as indicating that Parkland Acquisition Fund would allow the CVRD to build reserves and the capability to not only be able to purchase lands that are special and important, that would advance the district's reconciliation goals with local First Nations. I would like an explanation of what that means. I infer that means that lands acquired through this will then be ceded or turned over to local First Nations at taxpayers' expense. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Sorry, we don't take questions, but I will make comments to that effect when the items are raised following the public input period.
All right, I can save that for the question period. The other thing that I wanted to comment on was the study, or the comment that was based on a referendum that was 16 years old and does not predict.
Mr. Whalen, your time has expired. If you'd like to ask questions of the board, you can do so during question period.
I will do that.
Thank you. Mr. Robbins, going back to in the room, our list. Unfortunately, folks, we've got about 10 minutes left and many more speakers, so if folks do continue to take the full-time allotment, then we won't be able to get through the list today.
I have Kate McDonald.
Hi. So in 2008, my interest on my mortgage was under 4%. Back then, I would have voted yes. Yeah, we need more parkland. I am an environmentalist. I have great concerns about our environment. But when I'm working so hard, my nose is down to the grindstone, I can't get out and enjoy parks anyway. My interest rate is now 7.8%. I don't have money to buy other land. I'm trying to pay for my own. Now, I just took a few samplings of the area that would be sort of the same approximate sizes and people as ours. A Chilliwack, their interest hike is, tax hike is 7.32%. Sydney, theirs is a little higher at 8.42%. Salt Spring and the Gulf Islands, 7%. So where do you come up with 19.33%? How is it that much more expensive to live in this little valley than anywhere else on the island? Like, where can you shave down these things? You need a whole redo of this budget, not just parks. That's only 3-point-something%. That's nothing. The rest of it, 16%, surely you can do better. I mean, how many staff do you have? You guys got a $10,000 a year raise. I assumed that meant you'd be working harder, but it seems like you're just hiring more staff to add to our budget. Does the staff have any idea of these recommendations that they're putting forward, the costs, how much it's going to be a burden on us? Can they go back to the table and, let's look around, see how we can save money here? You don't just take the first big number and go, here you go, that's what you're going to do. I mean, if I ran my house like that, I'd be homeless. Now, I missed the pink shirt memo. I was bullied a lot as a child. I know what it feels like. And I'm getting that feeling all over again right now. I feel like I'm voiceless. I can't do anything. I'm powerless. Things are being taken away from me, like my land that I've worked so hard to buy. And you all sit around and you want to give us a 20% hike just to make sure that happens. Like, come on.
Mr. Robbins,
David Slade.
we have enough time for hopefully at least 3 or 4 more speakers.
David Slade from Cobble Hill / Shawnigan Lake. Thank you very much, directors. I'd like to speak specifically to the Parks Acquisition Fund. I really appreciate the dedication and the stress that all of you are facing in regards to the budget increases. I appreciate your dedication to your communities and your dedication to democracy. And I think that this is a really good example of democracy at work. So we have got a number of options before us, but as individuals and as business, the opportunities to do things that are of significance in regards to sustainability and climate change are fairly limited. There isn't a lot of tools in the toolbox, but for local government, protecting and preserving, acquiring parkland is the biggest tool that we've got. And I think that really for future generations, it is really the most important thing that we can do for our time as public servants. I know that really you're looking at cost benefit analysis. You've got to justify the pain for the gain. You've got to make sure that the juice is worth the squeeze. But let's consider the cost of these increases on ordinary people like myself and the rest of the people here, my children, my grandchildren. So for parks, for the increase in parks alone, we're talking about an increase of approximately $1 a week or less for the average property owner. That's the cost. So $1 a week in my budget. The benefit of that to all of us is $2.5 million generated to create parks that will benefit all of us, not just now, but in the future for our children and grandchildren. You could save me 50 cents or $1 a week in my budget by cutting back on the parks acquisition, but the cost to all of us as a community and a society will be millions of dollars of cost. So what about the silent majority? Obviously, I'm not part of the silent majority. Probably none of the people in this room are part of that silent majority. But you went to that silent majority, your forefathers did from the CBRD, and you asked their opinions about increasing taxes and acquiring parkland. And I'll just refresh, in Area A, it was 4-1 in favor, Area B, 6-1, Area C, 4-1, D, 3-1, E, 3-1, Duncan, 3-1, Ladysmith, 3-1, and overwhelmingly more than 2-1 in favor for support of this referendum, which was specifically to acquire parkland for the benefit of all of us. So I think that we can acknowledge that the Parks Acquisition Fund has been chronically underfunded for years. To continue to underfund it, I don't think is the way to remedy that. Your mandate is limited. You've got 2 more budgets after this one. I would suggest that the opportunity to make an impact is now and that it should be seized. The opportunity should be seized. I would suggest that the best time to fully fund the parks acquisition would have been 16 years ago, but the second best time to fully fund parks acquisition, in my opinion, would be now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slade. Folks, really, like I can pass on the clapping, but if you start jeering other people in the audience, then we'll clear the room. Mr. Robbins.
I've got Susan Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and directors. I do not envy you your job today, for sure. You have a very tough job to do, and I'm very pleased to see all of these people here. But I wonder, and I would encourage them to become more involved in our local government. And we heard at the budget meetings that you ran for the public how nobody showed up, or 4 people showed up. And that's the time that the public really has the ability to have that input to let you know and to help guide you. But I also know, just like myself and you at your home budgets, you have faced unprecedented rises in costs, just like everybody else. And looking in the binder today, $50,000 increase for 1 vehicle. So while I'm not happy with a huge tax increase as well, I know that it's the reality. But when it comes to parkland acquisition, and I think that's a terrible name for this fund, we need it. We need it to future-proof for the people that live here, for the livability, to sustain our water supply. And I really encourage you to work first on changing that name, but then also to fund it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Mr. Robbins? On our list.
I have Larry Gray.
And just if you point the microphone towards you. Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Go on now. Okay, thank you. It's on? Well, good afternoon, and my name is Larry Gray. I'm a resident of the Cowichan Bay since 2015. Before that, I was on a regional district in the Kootenay boundary. I was actually the chair of the regional district. So I know a little bit about the funding process and the difficulties that you face here. I was outraged at the start of when I saw how much the budget increase was going to be. But now I'm more sad. I'm saddened for all these people here today the ones who are really, really upset about the budget increase. And I'm sad for you too. I know you have some really tough things to do when you're building a budget, and I know how difficult that is. I'm going to leave out, I had this exactly to 3 minutes, but I'm going to go to the sort of the nuts and bolts here and talk about the big picture that I think is the problem. The real problem is the high tax increase that you were proposing prior to the parkland, because the budgets overall on the Vancouver Island, if you look comparatively, you would see that out of the 5 other regional districts on the island, the average is 10.66%. But you were up already at the 16% when you added in the parkland, and that's where the big problem, Flashpoint, comes in. But I don't think the parkland is a problem. I think the problem basically is your budget was way too high to begin with. And I really believe it's time to get in line with the other areas, to look at the others. We've got Capital Regional, 6% increase. We've got Nanaimo at the high end on the island, 13-point-something%. Now, today is not the time for problem solving at this table. You know that. You can't problem solve here. All you can do is take a look at where you're at and where you're going to go. And today is the time I would suggest, I'm going to strongly suggest, that it's time to table your budget until you have time to take it away and do some sober reflection based on the fact that you've got a tax revolt outside the door here. And I believe staff will tell you you don't have time to do this. Staff will say, look, we don't have time, and there's things that we can't cut. But believe me, from my perspective, having gone through this before myself, I can tell you that there's always a way to bring the budget down in line with what the expectations of the community and the overall region should be. So I've cut this to the chase here, and I think today, as I'm saying, time now to reconsider, to reflect, table your budget, go away, do some extra work, spend the time, and come back with a better number that the community can support.
Thank you. You did go over 3 minutes. You did go over your 3 minutes, but I was happy to let you continue.
I'm sorry. You owe this to yourselves and to the other people out here.
Thank you. Mr. Robbins.
I have Gretchen Hartley.
Welcome, Ms. Hartley.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. What a tough job you have in front of you. I know you folks to be visionary. Obviously, I've been here before talking about other things, talking about Cowichan Hospice. And I really urge you to have the courage to make a decision to support our acquisition of Parklands. There was a commitment made many, many years ago that we weren't, for whatever reasons, wasn't followed through on. And as the years pass, there's less and less opportunity to purchase lands and safeguard them. I urge you to support the parkland acquisition budget to safeguard the health of our community, the environmental health, the physical health, the spiritual and cultural health. I think it's really an important decision. It's an important tool. Please do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartley. Mr. Robbins, I think we have time for one more.
I have Sheila Bell Irving.
Got to lower this down. Good day, Sheila Bell Irving, Shawnigan Lake. I know you've seen my face a lot here. My taxes are currently $11,716 a year for a property that my grandmother bought in 1941 for $3,500. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever had roots here like the rest of us do, but I'm going to be priced out of my home. I pay $11,716 a year for a waterfront that has a toxic soil dump above it that's leaking. And I can't get the CVRD to test it. So if I'm going to be paying $11,716 plus nearly 20% more, I would like to see it go towards something that I can actually use, like knowing that my water is safe to drink, safe to swim in, and safe for my grandchildren to play in. Every day I look out at that lake and I know exactly what's in it. I stood at that toxic pit. I saw it. I have the list of contaminants in my front yard. So for the fact that I'm paying for transit, I don't use. I'm paying, it doesn't even come down my street. I'm paying for a library, not in my district. I'm paying for a whole bunch of stuff that I don't use. And the one thing that I did want to have done was my water tested, and that can't be done. So I don't know if you people are just following orders or what's going on here, but you're disconnected from the people here. You're disconnected from the people that actually put you in your chairs, that gave you your positions. In 2008, we didn't even have a toxic soil dump in Shawnigan Lake yet. That took thousands, millions of dollars in legal fees through the CVRD, which we paid for, to stop. And I said, we didn't even have that. Now, we have people living on the streets. We have people living in RVs on the side of the road. We have people that cannot feed their families. And now you want to raise our taxes by 19.33%? How disconnected can you be from your community? We are your community. We are the people that are paying this. Not you. We are. You keep saying it's just $1 a day or $1 a week. Right. That's just a coffee. But
Now you're turning on your own community members in the gallery, Ms. Bell Irving. Come
thank you very much. I will stop that. But that's $1 a week, apparently. Well, you'll say, well, that's just making your coffee or, giving up your coffee. I make my coffee at home. Now I might not even be able to drink coffee because I won't be able to afford the coffee. I won't be able to afford the groceries. I won't be able to afford to have this family property passed down to my grandchildren because I may have to sell it in order to pay the taxes. This is what you guys are doing to your community. I know it's a hard job, and it's just gotten harder. Thank you.
Thank you. So, that is the end of our public input period. So we'll continue on with the business of our meeting. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you. Next on your Section 5 delegations, you have a delegation from a Jackie Broughton.
Thank you. We do have 10 minutes for the delegation. I see you got the microphone on. Please go ahead.
Thank you. There's a few of us here today, a couple of family members who are here to share their input as well. What I'd like to say first is good afternoon, Chair, Directors. My name is Jackie Broughton. I appreciate the chance to speak to you today. I'm a resident and homeowner in the CVRD, and I'm here to deliver a petition to you opposing the proposed 19.33% tax increase. I would like to start by saying that I do not envy your position today. After watching recordings of your recent board meetings, it is apparent that many of you care very deeply about your communities. Your job does not seem easy, and I have genuine respect for your community service and the efforts that you do put forth on this board, truly. What I cannot respect is the way in which some individuals seem to have forgotten the plight of their constituents. Many residents of the CVRD are suffering financially in ways that I'm not sure is fully realized by those who are making our decisions. Some of the words spoken during the February 8th meeting give me pause. For example, during the discussion on whether to increase the budget even further, one member of the board said, "I would take some bottles back or cut a couple cups of coffee to make sure that I paid that tax bill." Another member of the board said that for parks, they would forego many bottles of wine to contribute to a fund. With respect, really, I have seen posts from CVRD residents who are asking their neighbors if they have any extra canned goods that they could spare because they don't have enough food for the week. This is not a matter of returning bottles and cutting specialty coffees. This is not a matter of cutting back on privileges and indulgences. Many individuals in our community are struggling to feed their families. They are in danger of losing their homes, or they've already been forced to leave the Cowichan Valley because of the rapidly increasing cost of living. I'm not here today to debate issues like parkland acquisition. The petition that I have with me represents many individuals with contrasting opinions and beliefs on CVRD issues. Personally, I agree with many of the initiatives that have been proposed by the board. However, I'm here to tell you today very strongly that a 19% increase is unreasonable, regardless of the priorities that it represents. In a time when residents are forced daily to choose between their needs and their wants, this board is piling on initiatives. Parkland acquisition, regional recreation, a new hospital, a new fire hall, and other projects all in the same year is excessive. You made efforts to limit CVRD service and department increases to 3.5 this year, but where are the limits for the board? We understand that taxes fund essential services and infrastructure within our community. However, it is crucial for the CVRD to consider its residents' ability to pay these taxes without compromising their quality of life. 11% last year, 19% this year. What is the next year going to hold for us? These yearly increases are not sustainable, and we are asking you now to respect our limits as your taxpayers. I have with me a petition asking the board to reject the proposed 19% property tax increase. This is not a petition to repeal the most recent increase of 3.39%. It is a petition to urge the CVRD to halt any plans for tax increases and consider how to make property taxes more affordable during these challenging times. I would like to read some of the comments that were shared by individuals who signed this petition. One commenter says, quote, "The federal and provincial governments are working to reduce the cost of housing and the CVRD is working in the opposite direction." Another comment, quote, "The economy is contracting and all sensible businesses are reducing their costs and realigning their services to make ends meet. CVRD needs to do the same." A different petitioner said, quote, "Long-term budgeting should incorporate slow, small increases that people can prepare for." Finally, these words from a long-term resident. "I'm selling my home and leaving the valley next spring because I can't afford to live here anymore. The house taxes, gas prices, food costs are so extreme that there's no way I can continue to live here. It breaks my heart. I've lived in this valley for 40 years, love my community and the life I have made. But it's impossible to stay. The constant tax hikes are breaking us. I sincerely hope the CVRD honors the wishes of the Cowichan Valley people, or many more will have to leave. If you approve a 19% increase today, you are causing undue stress for the CVRD residents. If you leave today with an increase of 15%, you are still putting incredible pressure on your constituents. Please, start over. Make the necessary arrangements to consider this issue further. Make plans to meet together for as long as it takes to walk this budget back to something that's more manageable for residents. Instead of saying that you have little control over the proposed budget, be accountable for every decision and each percent. Consider not only your increases, but all of the increases that your constituents are facing and decrease the budget significantly. If not to the 3.5% that was suggested last June, then at least to the Vancouver Island average. I believe that many of you would say that affordable housing is a major CVRD priority. Affordable property taxes are part of affordable housing. Giving families access to housing is not enough. We must also help them to keep their homes. Please commit to helping families afford their homes and bring property owners an increase they can manage. At this time, I'd like to introduce my brother-in-law, Jason, who's going to speak about his personal experience.
Thank you, and just for your own reference, about 4.5 minutes left.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Croker. I'm here with my wife and my newborn baby. In the summer of 2021, I fulfilled a dream of mine by purchasing my first home in Shawnigan Lake. This is something I know I am very fortunate and privileged to have accomplished in BC. Many of my friends and family have left the province in search of affordable housing, or for the worse, have accepted that they will never be a homeowner. Over the last 2 years, the unprecedented and record-breaking levels of inflation, along with the Bank of Canada's interest rate increases, have and continue to escalate the sacrifices families, like mine, need to make to remain homeowners. Many Canadian families are now finding themselves attending the food banks, pulling their children out of recreational sports, or needing to choose which bill is more important to pay on time this month. Within the span of 18 months, my mortgage had increased by over 38%, or $2,100, over $2,100 a month. This is just my mortgage. It does not include the property tax increase of last year or any other inflationary increases that have impacted everyday living. My income has not increased to match these expenses. The life I dreamed of when I purchased this home and the childhood I imagined for my children is quickly slipping away. To put it bluntly, my family does not have an extra $50 a month for anything, let alone anything this tax promises. This could be the straw that breaks the camel's back for many struggling families. It will push my family one step closer to make the difficult decision to leave the Cowichan Valley, just so I may continue to provide a home for my family. The affordability crisis currently burdening families across Canada, not only in the Cowichan Valley, has been thoroughly reported on over the last 2 years. It should not come as a surprise that so many of us here today are saying we cannot afford this increase. On page 4 of the current CVRD strategic plan, within the message from the chair and the board, it acknowledges the affordability crisis by clearly stating families are experiencing, quote, significant financial struggle. It is concerning that the board recognizes the financial struggle, but still proposes this tax increase. Here are the names of over 3,000 residents and property owners from the CVRD, as well as concerned citizens from the surrounding areas. Please take the time and space to properly consider their request and hear their voices. They may represent a family, like mine, that is struggling to remain a resident of the CVRD. Thank you.
And just quickly, this petition is still going. We've just passed 3,000. I have 2 copies here. One I think that I'm supposed to provide. Thank you to you. And a copy for the board.
Yeah, it would also go to Mr. Robbins, but thank you for that, and very much appreciate both your story and your delegation today. Does that conclude the delegation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Come to say.
I would go to our board members if they have any questions. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jackie, and your family as well. And I know it takes a lot of courage to stand up and do what you've done, so thank you for that. I think in this particular this particular thing, you've highlighted a lot of the things which I've got in my notes here, and that's the difficulty that that people have got here in coping with what's going on. And you know, Mr. Chair, I don't really have a question. I'm just going to agree with what you've said there, and thank you for coming forward.
Thank you, Mike. Any other questions or comments from the directors before we continue on with our business? Director McGonigal.
I just want to commend the delegation for their calm, rational approach addressing the board. It is difficult sitting up there and addressing not only this body, but the large body behind you, and I thank you for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? So we've got a lot to think about. Usually about this point of the meeting, we take a short recess, so I think it's good for all of us to take a moment, refresh your waters or what have you, go to the washroom, and we'll reconvene at 2:40. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's my trick chair, Director Douglas. When I first came on the board, that chair was mine. And every time I did that, what happened? Thank you. We will resume our agenda. Mr. Robbins, what's next on the agenda? Yep, no, we're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're moving to your report, the report of the chairperson with regards to reconsideration of Resolution 24076.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. So for clarity, Mr. Robbins did explain it under business arising from the minutes. In the meeting where the motion to reconsider regional parkland acquisition function funding under Resolution 24-076 was incorrectly ruled as requiring a 2/3 weighted majority vote. But when it was reviewed, it was seen that it was a bare majority but weighted vote as it's financial, and that vote to reconsider would have passed at that meeting. So therefore, because of that reason and others, The motion to reconsider has been brought back. The motion that was to be reconsidered is brought back and is now live on the table. And that motion reads that the Cowichan Valley Regional District Board fund the Regional Parkland Acquisition Budget 285 to the full amount of 2474730 is live and on the table. So just to be clear, this is a weighted financial vote. It is debatable, and it is as if the original motion is moved and seconded and back on the floor. So for clarity, to vote in favor would be to vote in favor of the motion that's on the floor, and to vote against would be to defeat the motion. It is a weighted vote, and Mr. Robbins does have the weighted vote sheet and will tabulate the votes at the conclusion of the debate after the vote is called. First on my speakers list is Director Martman.
So it's a question on procedure. If this vote is, this motion is defeated, what is the status?
Resolution 24-075, which sets the regional parkland acquisition budget at, sorry, I'll look that up exactly, $958,076, I believe. I'm just going to pull up the report here. Yeah, 958,076, I believe. Sorry, 958 even. So the motion on the floor is 2,474,730. If that motion is defeated, it would be 958,000, back to the previous approved budget amount.
That is correct.
Any follow-up, Director Martman? No. Further discussion, Director Segal.
Thank you. I've thought about this, obviously, a lot since that last budget meeting. And I've also heard from many residents from my area, Mill Bay Malahat, and across the district. And I feel like I've seen pretty much an even split between residents that are supportive of bringing this up to the maximum and residents that are really, really struggling with significant financial pressures at this time. And so it's because of that disparity that I hope we can find a compromise. I know that most people in the Cowichan Valley love recreating within our parks, and the referendum was supported. You know, people want more parks. I think parks are very important to our residents. And even in many of the emails that were really concerned about this tax increase, they also know the value of increasing parkland requisition, regional parkland acquisition fund. They see that value, but the financial struggle that they are facing outweighs that. We're all in that same boat, as been mentioned before. We're all buying that same $8 jug of milk now and shocked at those prices. We're all facing those heightened expenses for basic necessities. And that is leading some people to have to make really intense choices, like rent over medication or putting their children in recreation programs. And I just want to say that as an elected official, I'm a deeply, deeply feeling person, and that kind of stuff really guts me. I hear it. And also as an elected official, I want to support this regional district to provide services for our constituents. So I hope that everyone can understand this like horrendous pickle that this brings us to. I do believe, you know, this referendum was for parkland acquisition, land acquisition for preservation and climate mitigation, et cetera. I feel is important, but beyond the scope of local government, I think that right now we need to prioritize the economic stability and social welfare of our residents. And to find that compromise, I will not be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Director Wilson, then I have Director Acton online, and then Director Deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank Director Segal for that very elegant presentation there. I kind of wish I'll take some lessons from you sometime. First of all, let me be perfectly clear here. I am not seeking, and nor have I ever sought, to eliminate parkland acquisition funding and the association tax rise on our populace. In this respect, I have said before, I am quite happy and I will commit to progressive and reasonable annual funding. You've all heard, and I won't repeat it, about the hardship that people are facing. It's real. Everybody, not just, me or anybody out here. Everybody is feeling that hardship. And I would really like, and I know that there are a lot of people at this board that are involved in looking at the hardships that are going on. They know what's going on. For those who don't, walk with me to the Mill Bay Food Bank. Walk with me to the seniors' lunches and see what's going on down there. It'll break your heart. Mr. Chair, hang on a second, I've lost my place here. To my mind, this particular discussion should not concentrate on the very large increase in the parkland acquisition. It should concentrate on the residents' ability to pay, not just this increase, but all the others that they are about to be presented with, and that should be paramount, the ability to pay here, and that's what I'm working on here. And, I've said it again, and I don't mind repeating this over and over again, there is no such thing as a mere $20 or a mere $40 or even $1. And that outlook to me, Mr. Chair, is presumptuous, and it's pretty elitist as well. There is no such thing as only a certain amount of money. It doesn't exist. And just in conclusion here, 2008 or 2018, when I decided to run, one of the reasons I decided to run was because a statement was made at a public meeting which said, if you find your taxes, your property taxes burdensome, you can always choose to defer them. That's not true. That option is not open to a lot of people. And if a tax is considered burdensome, it's not a tax anymore. It becomes a penalty. And that's not right. I won't be voting in favor. I'll be voting alongside with Director Segal on this one. Let's just have some common sense here, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. I go next to Director Acton online, and then Director Deck. I do have myself on the list, but as usual, I'll keep punting myself down the list as others step on for the first round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with the previous two speakers, and I still feel that maxing this out is too much for our communities. I do feel like this function needs to have a plan and start growing, and our communities have made it very clear that this year is not the year. For me, the emails were not split. It was a huge amount of emails that I've probably the largest I've ever received, and the majority was concerned about tax increase. So that, as previously mentioned, this isn't the only item that this isn't going to solve our high tax rate at the moment, but I think it's somewhere to start, and I will not be supporting the full requisition on this function. I just wanted to also add, it's not common practice for us to max out a requisition. I can't think of one other function that we just max out. So, it was never intended to be the full amount. And I couldn't actually find the information of what it had started out as originally, but it has been consistently at $750 for a while. And there was a couple of years where we played with it a little too much. And I agree, it shouldn't be an area that we use to kind of buffer the taxes. So with a steady, I will support a steady rise. And I think that's fair, since every item we have looked at with great scrutiny. And then all of a sudden, this one didn't apply. It's not fair for it's not only just people who own land, but also renters. These kind of increases are going right to them as well. So I will not be supporting it, and I thank my fellow directors, everyone, for looking at this again.
Thank you, Director Acton. Next, I have Directors Deck and McGonigal.
Thank you, Chair. Am I okay? Yeah. I agree that the world is not the same as it was in 2008. The economy was in recession back then, and the effects of the climate emergency were just beginning to become a focus of concern. I too wish the fund wasn't called Parkland Acquisition, because it's really the acquisition of irreplaceable natural infrastructure that contains watersheds, that protects sensitive ecosystems, that promotes biodiversity, that preserves culturally important spaces, and that mitigates the local effects of the climate emergency. The CVRD is not immune from the rising costs that impact families. Savings accounts, like the Parks Acquisition Fund, are for a rainy day, like a new roof on a house. But in the case of the Parkland acquisition, the savings account, or the fund, is to be ready for the natural spaces that are, to buy the natural spaces that are becoming more and more rare and more expensive to buy. The CVRD, the Cowichan Tribes, Cowichan Valley Naturalists, and the BC Wildlife Federation did that, when they took the parkland, the park called Eagle Heights, and now, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce, sorry. Huasaluatsum, close, not even close? Not even close. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
So this park contains very important cultural values to Cowichan Tribes people and is a rare pocket of land of native grasses and rare species. It took the CVRD and partners 5 years to save this precious land. And there are two critical components for the provincial government to create new protected lands. One is that the local First Nation is in agreement, and second, that the community shows a strong commitment to protecting the land. The BC government said that they saw this in the fact that the CVRD had the funds available. This also led to leverage for other groups, or for the groups to find other funding. In the end, the Parks Acquisition Fund was not touched, but without this fund, this rare land would not have been protected. Having funds available leads to many more options, matching with other donors as well. So that's all I have to say just now on that. And I hope I got my facts straight. They were given to me by Genevieve Singleton.
Thank you, Director Deck. Director McGonigal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we spoke earlier this morning about the importance of protecting pieces within the region that we feel are important to recreate, for watershed management, et cetera, that each one of us at the table feel the importance of that. And I spoke earlier in the budget process about waiting until the update of the regional parkland requisition list and incrementally increasing from there. I think that would be prudent in my opinion, and I am only one opinion with two weighted votes, so I adhere to what this table says. But I think it's important, given the stresses that we have heard, not only from residents, but you look around the table and some of us are aged and on pensions and feel the impact of these increases as well. We are all taxpayers within the regional district, hoping to provide the best service that we can with the limited amounts that we have. Adding the pressures from senior levels of government on downloading constantly and telling us that we should utilize underused properties for housing needs. The conundrum is that we're asked to do too much with too little in such a short time.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Next, I have Director McClinton. Director Acton, I see your hand is up still. Did you need to be on list 2? No? Okay. If you lower your hand there, I'll keep an eye out for you. Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I was very pleased to see this come back. I was the person that put this forward for reconsideration, so it's great that we have a chance to discuss this. For me, there's a few things at play here. You know, when we first met as a board to talk about what our priorities were, we sort of gave the staff a mandate of 3.5%, and they went and did their job. And they came back, it was a little bit more than that. I think it ended up being 3.9% with a a round of supplementals that they deemed very important for us to maintain our services. And I felt that we went through a great process as a board, you know, agonizing over which things we needed to keep and which things we needed to let go to make sure that we maintain the services that our constituents demand. It seemed to me that as a board, we didn't feel we wanted to cut services, and so that was reflected in the budget. The other part was, you know, you guys know where I stand on this. I put forward a motion to bring this down to 0 initially, and that was defeated. I think the vote was 4-12, and we, you know, that was in committee, and it was to keep it at the 750. The part that I really struggle with is, I felt that I negotiated in good faith, for lack of a better word, and as we worked through those things, and this was brought forward at the very last minute, there was an increase and then taken to the max, and you know, just really feel like kind of bitten once, twice shy. And, you know, certainly if I would have known that this was coming forward, I would have operated in a very different way going through those supplementals, knowing that this larger increase was coming. So I will obviously not be voting in favor of this, and if there's any appetite, I would reduce it further, but I'll leave that till after the vote's done. Thank you.
Thank you, Director McClinton. I have Director Morrison next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Director Merman. Going through the M's on my Rolodex.
Apparently. I'm struggling because I want to talk about the budget, but the motion on the floor is about this particular increase. And I think I have to fall back to process. And echoing a little bit about what Director McClinton said, I think, put in hours and hours and hours of effort and debate, discussion, and consideration of all of the things that make up, 190 functions. And I think we worked really hard on it. And, you know, we did that in good faith, looking across the table at each other, giving and taking. And when we had the delegation before us making the ask, and I'll take responsibility for this, I don't know why, but the best practice and our normal practice is to refer that to staff, to come back for another meeting and consider it. I had no inclination and had done no preparation to be looking at, when we had a fairly big number to begin with, something in the magnitude of triple what the funding was at in the Parkland acquisition. So had some other words that I would use, but I'm disappointed that after all the effort and negotiating and debate back and forth, that at the sort of the last meeting, this was sprung on us. And it's a bitter pill to swallow, so to speak. And for those that are, you know, questioning whether or not I support the darn thing, of course I do. I was here voting against when it was cut to $150,000 a year and other reductions. I think this should be appropriately funded and kept up with incrementally on the basis of inflation or another factor. So when we did our corporate strategic plan and we put forth the goals and ideals, and it was fairly heavily oriented to environmental initiatives and the like, we all agreed to that. But there was a part in that corporate strategic plan that said that we were going to be fiscally responsible as well. And I can't square how we can go from 750 to 958 to 2.5 million. That's a tough one. We didn't really have advance warning on it. We didn't follow our best practices. We didn't follow normal procedure. And this is where we find ourselves today. I can't support 2.5 million. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Martman next. I'm still getting punted down the list for first-time speakers. Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for everybody for their insights and thoughts. I come from the perspective of sometimes a week or 2 weeks after decisions are made that we have time to think through things. We get a chance to hear from our communities, and I think that is so important. I would like to start at a very high level and work down a little bit. At the highest level, I feel uncomfortable that we are a them and us, that the board, the CVRD, and community just don't feel like it's all together. I know this was a sense in my community a few years ago. I think that has shifted. And I think it's because the sense is that we all are here together to try to create something that is the best future possible. And that's not easy. I think the constraints of local government, and I'm just a simple farmer. You know, I raise my cows. I've got lots, but I do have lots of education behind me, but I'm still a simple farmer, and I like to look at it through that lens, in that I have to work with my neighbors. If I don't work with my neighbors, farmers are toast. We have to get along. We have to somehow work out our differences, and I just want to find a place where we can do that as a group through the board, the CVRD, and our communities. And that would be my high-level future view of things. This is contentious because when I go and speak to my community, and I want to let you know about my community, I have no affiliations. I have affiliation to my cows and my fields and water, you know, and my neighbor's health and my neighbor's success. But I come from a perspective of, how do I best represent my community? What is it that they're saying about this? And so, and some of them can't be here. So their voice is really the same as what I'm hearing from here. It's both ends of the spectrum. I have, you know, those that are saying, you know, mortgages are up. And to not mention, insurance rates are killing us. You know, you try getting insurance for a farm. You know, and gas and diesel and all those things that are day-to-day, not to say even food. And one person saying, you know, it's moving where, you know, can people afford to come to a farmer's market? Can people afford to buy those products? And that's hurtful. You know, when you realize that some people are just not able to put the right food on their table to be nutritious. So where I'm going with this is that my community also has a very strong ecological group, and my shout out to them as well, because they're part of the community, and it's so very important. And they look down the road, and I think we hear 7 generational thinking and how important that is. But I want to end on where I sort of landed as a director and listening to my community, and it's listening to one lady who's an older lady. She's definitely been involved and had her finger on the pulse of our community. And I said to, and she called me up saying, "What's with this 19.33%? What's going on here?" And my job is to listen to her. Like, that's my job. And so, you know, I asked her, I said, "So what do you think about this?" And she says, "Well, it's outrageous. It's way too much." I said, "Well, would you cut back on parkland acquisition?" And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, would you make parkland acquisition zero?" And she goes, "Of course not." Which is my learning from the perspective of, well, what would be enough then? And she told me, and this is where I'm landing, a little bit, but certainly not the full amount. So that's how I'm learning and trying to represent the people. And in the end, I feel if I can do this well, I can hopefully help connect that where I started and remove the them and us. We're all we, and that's my hope. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Director Martman. Because people are putting up their finger when I finally got myself ready to speak, I'm going to put you after me. But I see Directors Justice and I believe Director Abbott as well, and Director Douglas and Nicholson. Man, you guys are just waiting until I thought we were getting close to the end. Justice, Abbott, Douglas, Nicholson. and then I'll go from there. Staples. And then I'll go from there. So the reason I felt compelled to speak now wasn't just because it was the end of my speakers list until a moment ago, but it was based on hearing the words of Director Martman and feeling a lot of insight into the struggle that I've gone through in thinking about this. We all have very different impacts, the way that the functions that we budget within silos, as set out in the Local Government Act, affect us. I think as it sits presently, I'm too scared to look right now, but I think the increase at the CVRD for Ladysmith is over 55%. And that shows the weird dynamics of regional district governance and participation in functions. And in one area out in the west, because of the regional recreation referendum, we have a couple of areas with small but reductions in the average home tax impact based on the current budget. We have other areas in the south and in some of the municipal areas with hundreds of dollars per average household impact. In Ladysmith, it's pretty easy to explain because it's right there in red and green, if you will, and it's not Christmas. The regional recreation referendum makes up probably close to 85 or 90% of the tax increase at the regional district table to residents in Ladysmith. Keep in mind there's a shift from municipal taxation for those recreation facilities to the regional, but it's not a even equal sum game. There is a significant increase that will be faced by residents of Ladysmith as well. Outside of the referendum, and we've got to be clear here, there was a referendum held at the last election with a 3-year phase-in that has made a real core part of that increase right out of the hop. So if we're looking at averages and people want to talk about 19%, we're talking about over 6% of that increase sort of baked in due to the regional recreation referendum. That is not optional. There are margins within that. There are budgets put forward by each recreation center, but the way that the referendum is laid out and the funding formulas are set, those funds have been shifted from municipal budgets to the regional district. It has a big impact in the negative in some areas, and in some areas that have traditionally overpaid for their share of recreation facilities, a positive impact. But generally, it's a big impact to the regional taxation. I only bring that up in regional parkland acquisition because when I looked at it from my area's perspective, I was really kind of setting aside regional recreation, knowing that the decisions around this table were only going to fudge that a little bit either way. Those increases were baked in. And in my area, with the supplementals in general government and the other needs we have in solid waste, we were talking about less than $20 a year for the average homeowner. When the motion that I was also not prepared for came forward, in the moment, I felt that it was really important for our region, and I still believe that in my core. I very much believe in the regional parkland acquisition function, and to answer the question, which I usually wouldn't do, supposed to me in public input, when I talk about advancing reconciliation through land acquisition, it isn't about handing it off, it's about collaborating and working together to protect even more special areas in our region. But I'm also a community member who's struggling financially. I don't know if anybody knows, but sitting at this table isn't a great paying gig. If there's anything we have in common, it's the struggle that we all have financially. We take time out of our other jobs and make great financial sacrifices to actually serve our communities. And as Ben said, this is what really hit me, it isn't an us and them, it's a we. And on sober reflection, second consideration with weeks or 2 weeks, I think there's an opportunity here to think about both things in equal measure, about the challenges that we have financially in the short term, but continuing our commitment to acquiring and protecting important lands for our work on climate change and biodiversity protection, recreation, and the health of our communities. Early this morning, we talked about our parks and trails in great detail and how more and more of our community members are looking to outdoor recreation rather than some of the recreation facilities that we have in the region. Mountain biking, hiking. I lost 50 pounds last year by getting off my butt and getting out to our parks and trails. So I've had a really intimate connection with our outdoor spaces in the last year. All of that being said, it comes down to the crisis that we face right now. I don't need to rehash them because I think other board members have spoke to them well. But I think that right now the most pressing issue for people is financial, and that we need to take a little bit of a more pragmatic step-by-step approach to how we continue to grow and fund and protect the important areas in the region. So on that note, I will not be supporting the motion that's on the floor, but I will work with my colleagues. I know that'll disappoint some in the community and some at this table, but I will work to continue to advance the priorities around the regional parkland acquisition program as we move forward year over year. But for today, I cannot support the increase that's on the table in this motion. I'm going to go to Directors Justice, Abbott, Douglas, Nicholson, and Staples. Director Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also for your words, especially with reference to the balance. I'm going to be voting in favor of the full requisition. As I said before, I think that balance is actually out of balance. I think that we're so overwhelmed with the various crises of today that we're not adequately thinking about the crises that will come to us, that are coming to us, but that are sort of easy to there's somewhat in the future and there's somewhat now. I'm thinking about climate-related water crisis. I'm thinking about biodiversity loss, which is related to climate change and which is related to habitat loss, which really what this parks acquisition thing is really focused on. The fund's been too low for too long. I think we all know that. There's a reason for that, because it's a really easy one to postpone, right? Every year since 2008, look at, taxes seem a little high. People aren't going to like these high taxes. Well, let's cut or not increase the parks acquisition fund. Next year's not going to be better, right? It's still going to be dealing with the change with regional recreation, and it's going to be 1 year closer to an election, and same thing is going to happen, I predict, because it's happened for so many years in the past. If our commitment lies with the adequately funding regional recreation, this is the moment. So I will be, as I said, voting for the full requisition.
Thank you. Director Abbott and then Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I don't plan on repeating. I will try not to repeat what has already been said. 3 weeks, sober second thought. A lot of impassioned emails, phone calls, both for and against what we voted on. I must say that on the 8th of February, I got caught up with the emotion, the persuasion, the need, and I still feel that we need to support our parkland, but more importantly, as I mentioned on the 8th, I think it needs to be renamed something to deal with water conservation and the whole ecosystem, as we've heard both this afternoon and at this morning's meetings. I will be voting, and I know I'm going to disappoint some, but I'm going to be voting against the motion. But I do hope that we will keep bringing this back, regardless of facing the electorate. It's important that we get this number up, but in a phased fashion over the next couple of years. So that suffice it to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Douglas, then Nicholson and Staples.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could ask the gallery to either take the remarks outside or please be silent while
Thank you.
directors are talking.
Okay, thank you. And please, members of the gallery, it's just the way that the legislation's laid out, this is a meeting in view of the public, but a meeting amongst directors. It's just challenging for some if there's commentary going on, especially those closest to the gallery, to be able to focus on each other's commentary and the debate that we're having at the table. Sorry, we don't generally. Okay, well, we'll do our best. If you folks can do your best to keep it down, we'll try and speak up. Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll try to keep this brief, as I think many of the points have already been covered.
With regards to the 19.33% tax increase, a number of the speakers pointed out in public input that we can't pin all this on the Parkland Acquisition Fund. This is 3.7% out of the overall 19.33% increase. There's a lot of other cost pressures behind that were debated at this table. So again, as we're debating whether or not to increase or maintain the requisition for the Parkland Acquisition Fund at its full amount, I just would hope we could be careful not to again blame the big tax increase we're facing entirely on that one item. With regards to the regional recreation, I thank you, Mr. Chair, for pointing out that is actually one of the big cost pressures we're facing this year, and that was an item that was determined through a referendum. So for our October 2022 election, the question of whether or not to move to a recreational funding model based on usage was put to CVRD residents, and through that referendum, a clear majority of 54% of residents across the CVRD decided to move to that model, and we are now in the process of phasing that in over a 3-year period. And that's a big reason why we had a higher tax increase than we wanted last year, why we're facing it this year, and why we're going to face that again next year. And with regards to that regional recreation funding model, I think one of the other, I know Chair Stone, you pointed this out, it's being felt differently in different parts of the region. So for example, even in my own municipality of North Cowichan, our north end, and including in Chemainus and Crofton, they're seeing an increase in their tax bill as a result of this shift to the regional recreational funding model, whereas our residents in the south end are seeing a net decrease. They're paying a bit more on the CVRD side, but a lot less in terms of their North Cowichan property tax bill. Having said all that, I will be supporting the motion on the floor here. We know that the land base and our watersheds right across the CVRD are under increasing strain. This was well documented a number of years ago in the State of the Environment report for the CVRD that was prepared by our staff and our then Environment Commission. We had updated data presented in 2014, 2015, and we know since that time our land base and watershed has continued to face greater strain as a result of population growth and development. And one area we're seeing this in particular is the coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone, which is one of the rarest ecosystems here in British Columbia, and one that has been severely impacted over the last 150 years. There's about just over 355,000 hectares across the whole CVRD. The coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone makes up about 42,000 hectares. Of that, about half of it has been permanently converted to residential, agricultural, and urban uses. And among the remaining half of that has not seen permanent conversion, it is under very poor ecological condition, and about 1% of it currently is set aside for conservation purposes. And whether we stick with the $2.5 million for the Parkland Acquisition Fund today, whether we stick with 850,000 or somewhere in between, I hope that going forward we can put a greater emphasis on protecting some of those vulnerable lands within the coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone. Just quickly, Mr. Chair, again, I want to keep these comments brief. I know you and others have pointed out at this table before that the cuts that we have made to the Parkland Acquisition Fund in recent years have resulted in this organization missing opportunities for strategic land acquisitions that do have high ecological value and are of significant interest to the public. And just to provide some history to members of the public, with the Parkland Acquisition Fund, we had been setting aside about $850,000 a year for this fund at one point. In 2019, we cut that down to $150,000, and we have not yet gone back to that 2018 levels, since that time. So even last year at $750,000, we're still $100,000 below the levels we were at in 2018. And we know during that time, our region has continued to face greater strain on the natural environment, and land prices have only gone up. And if I could just wrap up, There was discussion earlier today in our committee, of the whole meeting, around the 30 by 30 initiative. So this is international. Also, our federal government, provincial government are looking to set aside 30% of our land base for conservation by 2030. And the numbers presented to our committee earlier today indicated that somewhere around 8% of our land base in the region is currently set aside for conservation. Recognizing there are gaps in that, and the number might be a bit higher, but I think we can all agree, based on what was presented to us, that we're well short of that target of 30% by 2030. And I believe the number staff shared with us was that in order to reach that target over the next 6 years, we're going to have to acquire about 75,000 additional hectares for conservation purposes. Obviously, as a regional district, we don't have the tools or the resources to do that on our own. And I take Director Morrison's point earlier about the senior levels of government are going to have to play a critical role in reaching those targets. Although I would hope that by having a healthy amount of funds in our parkland acquisition fund, that we're going to put ourselves in a position to leverage some of those federal and provincial dollars, and also working with local First Nations, as I know some of our nations right now are very interested in potential partnerships focused on acquiring lands for conservation purposes. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Director Douglas. Before I go into my speakers, I just want to remind directors, please make sure you're logged in and online for showing on the meeting for the meetings. I know that staff, for those who are remote or for those at home, don't believe you're in the meeting if you're not showing up on the video feed. But with that said, I've got Director Nicholson and Director Staples.
Thank you. Well, there's been a lot said, and so I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say at this point. I would like to say that I believe taxes are an investment in the community. I don't mind paying taxes as long as they're well spent. And I'm not, I am like many people in this valley. I am property rich. I don't have a lot of cash at hand. I have a son that had to move home and a daughter who had to move to Terrace because she couldn't afford the island. So it's not, I do understand the pressures. And certainly our tax system, which is based on property assessments, does not reflect people's ability to pay very well. So that is a problem. But I also believe that we need to invest in the future. And we collectively, when we invest collectively in the future in our community, we will all have a way better place to live. And I agree completely with Director Justice. I think things are out of whack here. Because I am an ecologist by training, and I am so worried. I live in the Cook Silo watershed, which adds to my complete understanding about the situations that we're going to be facing in the future. If you think this budget is hard, wait till next year, wait till the year after. It isn't going to get any easier. And from my perspective, investing in parkland, it is one of the few tools we have that will help on the environmental front. Will help with those. Will help when you can acquire and protect key pieces of ecosystems. You can help alleviate some of the real challenges we're having with water supply, with water quality, with pollution. That just it is very complicated, but it's very real. And it's very difficult for people to see if they're not trained with a biological background. But honestly, I am so worried. And I feel that this is one tool we have in our toolbox for investing in the future. We invest in services like waste collection because we have to, but also because it makes our community better and will keep it healthy for the future. I think we need to seriously think about our natural environment and what we need to invest in to keep our natural environment healthy for the health of the community in the future. And yes, recreation is super important. Mental health is super important. I'm so happy people are out recreating because it's a good thing for the health of the community. Having great parklands is really good for attracting the doctors and the nurse practitioners and the dentists and that we desperately need in this community to keep healthy, because they only want to come and live in a place that's a great place to live. And one of the things that makes us a great place to live is our natural environment. In fact, I would argue it is the most important thing. But we have very little public land, as we heard this morning, and very little in the areas where the people live, which is super important. And we have huge environmental crises happening. So if we cannot turn our heads to investing $2.5 million a year in parkland acquisition, then we are not being community leaders, I believe. So I will be voting for this.
Thank you, Director Nicholson, Director Staples, and then Director Istash.
Thank you. I wish that we weren't speaking about this at the same time that we're looking at adopting, the budget. I wish I would feel much more confident if we had a plan that said, every year, this year we're going to commit to increase it by this percent, next year by this percent, and if we had something that I could trust we would get to and we would stick with, that would happen over this year and next year. Because for me, where I struggle with making this decision, there's a lot of places, and I've gone back and forth so many times on how I feel like I'm going to vote on this motion. Because I understand what it's like to be facing challenges financially. I've been a single mother in my life. I've faced a lot of financial difficult choices of how to just, balance paying a hydro bill over payments versus getting food. I've been in that position. I completely understand what that's like. I also know that during that time, I was able to take my son out into nature here, and that I had access to so much space with him and things that I could do with him in the natural environment here. And that was a huge place for, whether it's for just being a mother, first of all, but also for going through challenges and not having the ability to, be able to go out and do other things. Not being able to go out for dinners or going to be able to support, to go to see movies or whatever it was at that time. So I understand those choices. But at that time, when I couldn't afford to do those other things, that was the main thing that we were able to do, was to go to the beach, to go to the park, to have access to all these places that in other areas you don't even have access to because you have to pay to go to them. And so, so I think through that lens, and then through the conservation lens of our watersheds are at risk of so many multiple factors. We know that we don't have enough snowpack to get us through this year. We know we're going to be facing droughts, most likely droughts that we've never even imagined before. And what if there is a piece of land that we're able to help better protect that system that we're not able to access because we're not making this decision today? And then I think of the hardships that I think the majority, of people to some degree we're all facing hardships in terms of the cost of inflation, in terms of the cost of living, in terms of assessed values of our houses increasing exponentially. And, that the tax increase isn't just about the amount of taxes that is being increased around this table. It's about the values of our homes going up. And none of us have any say in how that works. There's so many different, it's not just simple. None of this is simple. And yet being out in nature is simple. Being able to go out on those days where, we've had whether it's whatever it is that's happening in our lives, long days like this, where we're having to make impossible decisions. The fact that we're having discussions about choosing environmental protection, access to nature over, people's basic costs of living and lifestyle and basic needs being met. These are impossible situations. And yet, I want my son's children to have the ability to go out into parks and to have that access. And so if I make a decision that isn't supporting parkland acquisition and isn't supporting and saying that this is really important and valuable to us as a community, this is important to our mental health and well-being. This is something that, yes, these types of tax increases are very hard, and they do impact us. But this one piece of this budget that we're forced to talk to today when we're, talking about a tax increase, this to me is not the discussion. This is not where I want to strip back. But this is the only place that I have the ability to even discuss saving a bit of money, which I know helps, and I understand that. And so I feel torn, because if we don't, I've sat at this table now for, I think this is my 6th year here, and every time we get to budget, we have some form of this discussion. And every time we're forced with, if we're not taking care of the future, if we're not looking, 20 years down the road, 100 years down the road, when we're making decisions, then what are the implications for those other people sitting around these tables at that time? We're just, punting it off to someone else, which is exactly why we're having this discussion today. Because boards before us, myself being on them included, did not just say, this is what we have identified as important to us, this is what our community has said is important to us, and we're sticking to it, and we recognize that it's going to be challenging, but we have to do this. Because I don't want to leave this decision for someone else. I don't want to be back here having this conversation again next year. And I also recognize that we're trying to, and I hear all the other directors and the speakers, and I too feel like the emails that I got were very 50-50. And I hear that as well. And I really feel like I'm sitting on the edge of that decision. Because either way, I have to compromise something that my fundamental core values do not want to compromise. So which one do I get to compromise today? Because that's really what the choice is. And again, if I knew without a doubt that we would not be having this conversation again next year, because we had established already that this was important and we were going to get it up to the maximum, and it was going to stay there until a next board comes up and decides that they need to cut something, so then they cut it, and then we go backwards again, and then the same conversation starts over again. And so it is hard to make these decisions, and people being angry with us is part of what happens when you sit at these tables. And it's an unfortunate piece of it, but it is what happens. And I'm tired of always being put in these positions, and not maybe tired isn't the right word, frustrated with always being put in these positions because of, decisions that are either out of our control or things that were made, in times past when everyone was saying that these things are important to protect, that we have to make sure that we're looking for our future. And they made the requisition in 2008. They went to the community, this is important. And what discussions happened that didn't ever lead to that getting up to the maximum and staying there? And here we are again. And so with that, I'm still on the fence of how I'm going to vote. But it is going to be a hard decision on me either way, because I feel like I'm robbing from the community now if I don't support this, and the community of the future, and I'm putting challenges on people for voting to support this. So it's a lose-lose. And that's the position that we're in today, with this being on the agenda the way that it is at this time. with the tax increase being on the agenda at the same time.
Thank you. I have Director Istash on my list. Directors, obviously a lot to consider in this discussion. Director Istash is last on my list. I might consider that we're due for a recess, that after we go to Director Istash, we take a short recess, come back. I'll call the question, and then we can move on to, I have a few things else that I want to share under report of the chairperson, and then we can continue with our business. But I'll go to Director Istash and then take the pleasure of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And being on the last of the list, I'll just be able to say that it's timely and to thank Director Staples for everything she said, because I couldn't have written it or said it better. That was pretty much what my reflection and thoughts were going to be, is what you shared. And to that, it echoes of what Director Nicholson said, is our job is there are tough decisions in front of us today, but our decisions really, what boards' roles are, isn't thinking about today. It's thinking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. It's about setting long-range vision, policy, and direction, and then rely on the talented staff to make the day-to-day hard decisions to achieve those goals. I just wanted to take the quick opportunity to share what I had said this morning in the committee discussion, was that it's unfortunate the grammar used to name this acquisition fund, just saying parkland again, to take the opportunity that we have different people watching and listening, is saying that I reiterate what others have said around the board, saying parkland doesn't properly reflect the important role this plays. As we've learned through local government, and in this area, I think North Cowichan being one of the oldest municipalities, there are 150 years of experience in the area. And we finally have just really realized that our natural ecosystems and natural asset management are as important to preserve, protect, and invest in as we do roads, sidewalks, streetlights, pipes, sewer, all those services. The ecosystem equally needs to be invested in and preserved, because if we don't invest in those assets, it's going to greatly cost our taxpayers and the people that we're responsible to. So much like we want to save for the future, it's timely being RSP season, and everybody says we need to invest in the future. Don't spend that money right now. Don't invest it for the future. That's what we're doing here. Reserve funds play a pivotal role, and it's just not parkland nice to have. As I said, the other directors said it all. I don't have much else to say other than I wanted to reflect most on what Director Staples said, was what is the opportunity to phase this in and have a steadfast in. We could say, you know, if this fails, does it go back to the other motion, or is there a opportunity to, like, is it the two choices right now? This one fails and it goes back to the 958 that was on the floor, or is there still a motion? Is there an opportunity for a different motion to amend the 958? So
Thank
that
you.
was why my question was to you, Mr. Chair.
So if this motion fails, the previous motion at 958 stands. Of course, there is room for other budget motions, but to be clear, any motion that says committing to, that's not done through bylaw or otherwise, but budget motions about successive years cannot fetter with future board decisions. So although someone could say it goes to 1.5 next year, the board next year during budget deliberations would be faced with making that decision. The only difference is staff would include it in the core budget. So you cannot legally fetter with the subsequent year's budget. Placed in the 5-year financial plan, yes, but not insulated from future board decisions.
If I could follow up on that, so say the 2.4 fails and it goes back to the 958. For this year, is that 958? Can that still be amended, or a motion be put on the floor to
A
amend?
motion could be, yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious.
As long as it's not against the spirit and intent of the previous motion that would now stand, which is 958. If that were the case, then a motion to reconsider would be necessary, and I'd have to check with the documentation on motions to reconsider. But yes, if the motion on the floor fails, 958 would be the standing funding amount. If a further reduction would be against the spirit and intent of that motion, I'd have to check with my parliamentary staff on how to consider that. Future motions to increase would be in line with the spirit and intent of the previously adopted motion and would be ruled in order.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. No further speakers on the list? Oh. Okay. Well, every time I try and set something up for our break, Director Acton. Second time speakers. Is there any first time speakers before I go to second time speakers? Seeing none. Director Acton. You're muted.
Sorry, I just have a question for staff. I'm making an assumption, so I just want to clarify. I'm assuming that there's going to be a plan coming forward before the next budget on this function, because we've discussed this before. Is that correct?
Through staff, I believe one of the budget items is a regional parks and trails update, but I'm not sure, would it be completed in time for next year's budget? And I know we don't have Mr. Farquhar here.
If you give me a few minutes, I'll come back after the recess with the answer to that question.
Okay, is that okay, Director Acton? Thank you. We're going to take a recess. We'll return at 3:55, so which means likely 4 o'clock. All right. Hamster wheels are spinning up. Thank you. Welcome back to our regular board meeting. We are returning to the motion on the floor. And we've gone through first round speakers, taken our first, second round speaker. Yeah, Director Acton, just want to make sure you're there before we call the question. I'm just going to look to the table.
Sorry.
No worries, just making sure you're there. Any speakers, second round speakers to the motion before I call the question? Seeing none, Mr. Robbins, can you please just read the motion that's on the floor for clarity?
That the Cowichan Valley Regional District Board fund the regional parkland acquisition budget function 285 to the full amount of $2,474,730.
No further discussion? Sorry, I should answer Director Acton's question. I did see, he told the chair. So it looks like about a 13 to 15 month process to go through the Regional Parks and Trails Master Planning process. So that would be sort of to inform the 2026 budget. So just for clarity, but again, next year's budget is next year's budget, but we will not have the full reports from the Parks and Trails Master Planning process until after the next budget process. So for the 2026 budget. No further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Directors Istash, Toporowski, Justice, Deck, Nicholson, Staples, and Douglas. And those opposed? Directors Segal, McClinton, Wilson, McGonigal, Morrison, Abbott, Martman, and Stone. and Acton. Opposed. I believe it's 27-23 to defeat. Director Acton opposed. So the motion is defeated.
Motion is
Mr. Robin.
defeated. Correct.
Thank you. So for clarity, the previous motion to,
I'm just going to confer with my colleagues.
Mr. Robbins is just going to check for clarity and accuracy, but based on the weighted vote, the motion fails. So for clarity, the previous motion of sorry, I'm just pulling up the number. Thank you. I know the dollar amount, I was just looking for the motion number 24-075, I think is still valid. So the funding at present is $958,000. So with that, I do have another item I wish to address under report of the chairperson. And that's based on the overall discussion of the budget. And I think a lot of us put together the regional parkland acquisition discussion with the overall budget discussion. I did hear one of our public input speakers speaking to some of the averages and other regional district budgets. And I want to reflect on the fact that the one major difference between our other regional district colleagues across the province and us here in the Cowichan Valley Regional District was the referendum for regional recreation that was carried in the previous election. For clarity, that introduces for the 2024 budget year a 6.17% increase based on the referendum outcome. That's not a decision of this board, that's a decision of the electors that was made at the last election, phased in over 3 years. Based on our present status and reflecting on that, that takes our budget into the sort of 10-11% range for this year. In that discussions, we had made necessary investments in the solid waste complex, general government, including IT functions, and others. And I think it's important to recognize and respect the decision of the electors in supporting the regional recreation referendum, although I know that for some areas, it's actually reduced taxes, but in most of our areas, that's resulted in an increase. I'm pretty sure my area's budget right now is probably in the 50% increase range, not solely, but the vast majority because of the regional recreation referendum. That being said, I also recognize that there are different thoughts that the directors may have on budget, and that we do have limited opportunity, but some opportunity to discuss what those changes might be. So that being said, we do have the remainder of our agenda in front of us today, and we will be going through the rest of our budget as my report of the chairperson concludes. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question for my own clarification. At this point then, the budgets that are coming forward, is there still any discussion or any room for any little changes there, or are we now going to discuss what is on the table and say that's it?
Well, I'll never fetter with the opportunity of my colleagues to make motions. I would contend that based on our deliberations and process to date, I would sort of stand on the words that I've heard around the table today of the respect of the process and the challenge that the referendum creates for different impacts around the region, but respecting that. But our colleagues and yourself always have the opportunity to make further motions. Myself,
No, that's fine, Mr. Chair. It was
Yeah.
just a general inquiry for my own clarification. Thank you.
yeah. And I think that, yeah, I'll save any further comments for any debates that are necessary as the discussion moves along today. That does conclude the report of the chair, so we'll move to item 7, correspondence. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for the board's information. It's a correspondence from Sam Turcott, the Assistant Deputy Minister. It's regard to a follow-up letter that the CVRD had sent to the Minister with regards to funding of the requirement for the CVRD to have an accessibility committee and the costs associated with operating that committee.
Thank you. And not to take advantage of an opportunity to reflect on senior government downloads, but I in the context of our conversations today, I can't pass it up. There's a significant amount of expenses being either intentionally or inadvertently shifted onto local governments in this province. This is one example. We did reach out to the province to ask them for assistance in funding this new requirement. However, I would say that I think we're all supportive of the goals outlined by this committee work, which is to address accessibility concerns within our communities, but just be understanding that those accessibility requirements and such were usually the bailiwick of the provincial government. Those regulations were set and handed down to local governments for implementation. Now they're asking local governments to take on that responsibility and the costs associated with doing that work. The Accessibility Committee is one. And also just to reflect on, that's one of many, either implicitly provided to local governments, like further requirements around emergency management and housing, but also those other social issues that we face in community that have increasingly become the burden of local government around people experiencing homelessness, people with challenges around drug use, and the impacts on our communities. So that being said, I think if there's any further discussion on the correspondence item, Director Segal.
Yeah, just a question through to staff. I noticed in the letter, there's the reference to a grant that is available. Do we have the capacity to apply for that grant to help fund this accessibility stuff?
Mr. Robbins. You want to trade seats? I'll take it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the funding is available for identified projects and certainly for putting together a plan. And so we have yet to bring the group together. And so there may be an opportunity as we develop a plan. We may need to seek some outside help, and we'll make application to that. And it is also there to fund anything that comes out of that committee in terms of project work. So at this time, we haven't made any applications, but they are available too for those two things.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the correspondence item? Okay, seeing none, we will continue. Mr. Robbins.
We're going to move to CR1, which is a report and recommendation of the Committee of the Whole meeting of February 14, 2024. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much. That would have been Valentine's Day, my colleagues, and we did suggest at that meeting, your Committee of the Whole reports and recommends that renewal of the non-exclusive trail license agreement with Earth Corporation Incorporated, number A0081362, for a section of the Cowichan Valley Trail Malahat connection across a portion of Lot 4, Plan VIP 85007, District Lot 50, Malahat Land District, commencing April 1st, 2024, with a one-year automatic extension, be approved, and I will move that.
Moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Segal. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Mr. Robbins.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director McGonigal.
CR2 is report and recommendations of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of February 21st, 2024. There are, I believe, 12 recommendations. Director Morrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I know it's usually Mr. Chair that says Director Morrison, but Mr. Robbins is on it today. Director
Been
Morrison.
a little bit of a different day. So I'm just looking at the resolutions for all directors. This has been published online, and unless you really want me to read each of the resolutions, I could summarize. And we have C1, 2, and 3 are grants and aid, 2 for electoral area D, 1 for electoral area F. R6 is budget for the Malahat Fire Department be amended by increasing transfer to capital reserves and increasing capital expenditures. That was an increasing transfer from capital reserves. And R7, Mill Springs Service Establishment bylaw to include properties with them being connected upon payment. And R9, that new water system service area be established with long-term borrowing and elector approval being sought through the AAP. And I would move those, I believe, 5 items, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Second.
5, 6 items.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion on those items? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. For clarity for folks who are just joining us and don't usually follow our proceedings, these were all debated and discussed and recommended at committee to the board. That's why there's rarely discussion at this table on the committee referrals. Mr. Robbins.
I have electoral area directors.
Oh,
to
sorry,
vote on.
my apologies. Director Morrison.
So we have items R1, R2, R3, R4, and R5 and R8. I think these were dealt with fairly expeditiously and straightforward items, were published in advance. Does anyone want any pulled? For electoral, this is for electoral area directors only, and I would move those items.
Seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion on those items for electoral area directors only? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
That concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Morrison.
And the report and recommendations of the Committee of the Whole from earlier today, February 28, 2024. There is a recommendation before the board. Director McGonigal.
And we'll have you read those out, Director McGonigal, as they weren't published.
I think I will, with your direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Committee of the Whole Chair.
Little levity never hurts anyone. Good afternoon. Your Committee of the Whole earlier today reports and recommends, 1, that the Regional District of Nanaimo be advised that the Cowichan Valley Regional District accepts Regional Growth Strategy Shaping Our Future 2040, bylaw number 1874, 2023. And also that the Cowichan Valley Regional District requests that the underlying words be added to the Regional District of Nanaimo's Regional Growth Strategy bylaw number 1874, policy 2.1, when next amended, as shown. And it states, work in collaboration with property owners, developers, businesses, appropriate provincial and federal agencies, and local governments to protect the life-supporting qualities of fresh surface and ground, in brackets, and seawater from degradation and depletion. And I will move that.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Segal. Discussion on that item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Director McGonigal. Mr. Robbins.
Moving to staff reports. SR1 is a report from the Senior Engineering Technologist, Utilities Division, with regards to Utilities Function 576, 2024 budget amendment with respect to a vehicle. There's a 2-part recommendation.
Can you read the recommendation?
That the 2024 budget for Function 576 Utilities be amended to 1, increase the capital expenditure vehicles and machinery from $75,000 to $125,000, and 2, increase the transfer from 2023 surplus from $0 to $50,000.
Thank you. Has that been moved? Moved by Director Segal. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Morrison. Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you. It's not requisition, it's transfer from prior year surplus. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Mr. Robbins, I believe, as we've made amendments to the budget today, SR2 will not be considered.
What
And
I
would be
suggest is a motion
motion.
postpone until the next meeting.
Thank you. Looking for that motion. Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Martman. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Mr. Robbins.
That brings you to Section 13 bylaws.
Please go ahead.
And just,
Making sure the right ones.
and these are all, these are for consideration by
All directors.
all directors. B1, CVRD bylaw number 4555, Lake Cowichan Fire Protection Service Amendment, that's boundary extension bylaw 2024 be adopted.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Mr. Robbins.
Recommendation under B2 that CVRD bylaw number 4556 Malahat Fire Protection Service Amendment, boundary extension bylaw 2024 be adopted.
Moved by Director Segal, seconded by Director Martman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
Under
Mr. Robbins.
B3, that CVRD bylaw number 4558 Malahat Fire Protection Service Amendment, boundary extension bylaw 2024 be adopted.
Moved by Director Segal, seconded by Director Martman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
Under B4, the recommendation that CVRD bylaw number 4506 Shell Beach Water System Service Area Establishment bylaw 2023 be adopted.
Moved by Director Martman, seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion? Sorry, seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
Under B5, the recommendation that CVRD bylaw number 4507 Shell Beach Water System Service Loan Authorization Water Treatment Upgrades to $275,000 bylaw 2023 be adopted.
Moved by Director Martman, seconded by Director Morrison. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
And similar to SR2, a motion to postpone consideration of B6, CVRD bylaw number 4562, five-year financial plan, 2024 to 2028, bylaw 2024.
Moved by Director Martman, seconded by Director Segal. Question? Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if there is, I know we're getting pretty late in the budgeting process now, but if there is interest in making further tweaks to the, to the five-year financial plan, could you perhaps walk the board through what you envision in the process?
I brought that forward before I closed the report of the chairperson. I would have looked to those motions when I kind of hung it out there before, but I don't know, I would look through to staff on how we might accomplish that. The motions.
Sorry, yeah, I missed that.
No, it's okay. I think what we probably anticipated was that under SR2, but being that SR2 was forwarded to the next meeting, then that was kind of where the placeholder was for further budget amendments. Ms. Bowen.
Through the chair to Director Douglas. I would look for motions if you want to make change to the budget, preferably sooner rather than later. I'd like to have the adoption done by the 13th, just because of the short staff in finance and all the work that needs to be done, that the sooner we can get this tied up, the better it would be.
Okay. So I guess it's an unusual place in the agenda, but you're welcome to put forward any motions that you may have now. And respecting that, you know, that I'm not sure the substantive changes that might be required to make a big dent would be possible at this stage, but I'm open to hearing what you have.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I know it's been a long day and I don't want to start putting forward ideas if there's not an appetite around the board. I'm just wondering if there's some way the rest of the board can give it some indication whether or not there's any interest in exploring this, because there isn't, then it might be a bit of a waste of time for me or others to start putting forward specific proposals.
I'll go to the directors. All I can say is I'm looking at the area by area budgets, and other than making dramatic changes that would affect service levels, we might be able to, shave a few dollars off the budget at this late stage. But I've got Director Morrison, and then I believe Director Wilson. Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to repeat what I said earlier, but just reflecting that when we were having our last board meeting and contemplating budget, I think despite there were areas that I think as individuals we had hoped that we could have seen changes in various different budgets, the stark reality is that I think we were just about at a place where we were ready to proceed to bylaws. So I think given the time and the huge effort for a very small, if any, return, I've seen many times when we've engaged in these exercises that we actually ended up with higher numbers than lower numbers when we start adjusting at the end. I'm pretty comfortable with the work that's been done to this point and wouldn't want to be seeking to dive back into areas that have been fully debated already.
Thank you. Director Wilson, then I have a question for Ms. Bowen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, Tracy, you've been bounced around all over the place here with head changes and all the rest of it, and they've coped beautifully. I think in this particular case, I would like to hear from Mayor Douglas or Director Douglas what he actually has in mind, as opposed to putting it out there for us to say we like this one, the other. If there's anything you can add to that, anything specific you have in mind, I'd like to hear it if possible.
Thank you. Question through to Ms. Bowen before we do that. And I can't remember the numbers because I don't know how you do it in finance, because the numbers all just start to look like those memes with floating formulas in front of my head. With the change to regional recreation back to the previous amount, not exactly, but do you know what the present budget increase looks like?
16.35.
And 6.17 of that is the regional recreation referendum. So we're essentially at 6.1 or 10.13.
Yes, that is correct. And then there's also the library and
Which we don't
transit.
control.
Yes,
And
exactly.
RCMP,
Yes.
which we also don't control. And provincial,
Yes.
which we also don't control. Thank you. I just think that's important. It was brought up earlier in our meeting about looking at other regional districts across the island and reflecting on the averages and the highs and lows. And outside the referendum question, that puts us right in that same bracket. I just think it's important to recognize that I believe there was a lot of good discussion over many, many hours involved in debating the budget, dealing with some of the challenges, and also the pressures that we all face. I'm comfortable with where we're at. If we're talking about changing items of $75,000 here or $100,000 there, we're talking about making, point percentages change in that number. But before I go to Director Douglas, it looks like Director Acton wants to speak.
Oh, you're letting me go? Thank you.
Yeah, Director Douglas has spoken. I'm going to him,
Okay,
back to him after I hear from her colleagues.
Thank you. I'm kind of questioning the comment, but the statement that the regional recreation number is not changeable. There's a lot of, yes, the percentages delegated per community are not changeable, despite the fact that they are higher than what we anticipated would happen at this time. But a lot of the community centers have included high budget items for asset management. And suddenly, new areas are also paying for those. So I would question, I would entertain some looking at the budget for a while. I honestly can't today. I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel done. But I would be happy to have a special meeting in the next day or two or something that if we could go over some of these items. I also just wanted to make a comment because I haven't found a place where I could do this. People mentioned that next year, you know, it's just going to keep growing. Taxes are just going to keep going up. So I think it's prudent for us to do something about that. And I used to talk about this when I first got on this board, but just talking about profit centers and the private sector and local governments being able to make money and fund things. You know, I think our population is so small and the dollars just keep rising. And our board is full of business owners. Like, I think it would be great if we could at least all have a conversation around that sooner than later. Something that, anyway, I know I'm off topic, so but I really think I could be re-energized because I've been beaten down so much about whenever I would talk about private centers that, you know, that wasn't something we were going to look at. But clearly we can't just keep taxing people and taxing them more. But if there's room for budget items, I don't see why we shouldn't be looking at decreasing it.
Thank you. Ms. Bowen.
Through the chair to Director Acton. So the 6.17, I know we refer to it as regional rec, but it is the extra tax money that we are having to tax to the CVRD from the municipalities and from the sports plaques. So it comes from what their budget of what they weren't taxing for that we're now taxing for through regional rec.
Yeah.
That's where that extra money comes from.
Yeah, and those budgets are set by the Recreation Commissions and approved by the board. Yeah. So just for clarity on how that process worked. I've got Directors Martman and Segal before I go back to Director Douglas.
It's funny, it feels like this whole meeting this is a never-ending meeting.
Well, I was going to say, we can't call a special meeting in the next couple days because of notice requirements. We'd have to waive notice, but we could just continue this meeting forever.
Yeah, so let's go for it. So, and I don't know where to put this in because, and this, one of those things is about budget. But where we started at, and you read it in every document that staff put forward, is that the 3.5% mandate that staff came up with. But one of the little numbers that I think that I'm sharing with my community, and I don't know if we all missed it, but 92% of those departments in the CVRD came back within that 3.5% mandate. And that's a big shout out because that's huge. We really chewed over that 8%. I know my community would be interested in keep chewing, find what you can, do what you can where you can. But we did go through that process very, very thoroughly. And I would turn to staff. If staff can come back in the next week or so and say, hey, we can find something here, my community would be all for it and I'd be all for it. And if Director Douglas has something that he can suggest that's going to help lighten the burden, I'll be very interested to hear it. Thank you.
I have Director Segal and McClinton before going back to Director Douglas to see what he might have on his spreadsheet.
Well, I guess I just have to say we were all there when we debated every single part of this budget, aside from those of us that are not on all of the recreation commissions, but Director Douglas is on all of them. We were all there. We heard the business cases. We debated, we made those decisions. Here we are at the end of the budget, and hindsight is always 20/20. There might be things that we thought could be done differently, but we have next year, talking about income generation, that's, not for today. Exploring where we can have service reductions to deal with other increases we have. We can take that into future budget years. But right now, if there is something Director Douglas has that actually has a big impact that cuts multiple percentages off, okay, I'm interested to hear what you have to say, but if it's just a small amount that's just kind of ends up being virtue signaling, right? I get it. We'd like to, cut here, cut all these little, try to get, but if we're end up looking at 0.2% change, it just feels like a really long meeting for not a lot of benefit.
Thank you. Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is difficult. I was just kind of trying to bite my tongue. I too appreciate the process we all went through, having negotiated through many of those supplementary items, and with the reversal of that last motion, certainly feeling a bit more comfortable. I am prepared to go to my community and defend the decisions we made, but I also know Director Douglas has been at this a long time. He knows his stuff, and he's been thinking about this, so I just like to, if there's a way to maybe hear what some of the things you have to say without maybe first a formal motion and then kind of take it from there. I don't know if that's possible. I think we owe it to the public, and clearly there's interest in what we're doing here today.
Thank you. Any other speakers before I go back to Director Douglas? Always. Yep.
Mr. Chair, just before you go back to Director Douglas, I just wanted to suggest the staff had talked about how alternative or amendments to the current budget would come forward. So we have talked about scheduling of something like that, and we would look at the morning of March 6th potentially as an opportunity if we wanted to have notices of motion. So if there's things that are very obvious and staff can easily explain here today, we can speak to them. But if there are things we need to dig into a little bit more to answer questions and provide a bit more context, then we can come back at a special on March 6th would be the proposal.
Thank you. Okay. Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I hope I don't let everyone down here, but I don't have any big silver bullet that's going to fix this large tax increase we're facing. I have a handful of ideas that are mostly items we've discussed already. We've seen the business cases, we've debated them, and I guess my expectation was that if there was interest in the board in looking at looking at cost reductions, that we might all have some ideas that collectively could add up to a significant difference. But yeah, again, not to let everyone down, what I have here is not going to add up to much and isn't going to make a big difference in the overall percentage. So I'm happy to share with everyone, but would understand if the board is not keen on redebating some of these items that most of which we have gone over already.
Thank you. Maybe just run through your list quickly. Right. And
so all I've got here, and I've gone over these and some other items with the CAO in advance of the meeting just to get a sense of what's realistic and what isn't. So as part of the supplementals, we did approve a number of new staff positions. For each one of those, there was a business case. And I do acknowledge that, for members of staff to bring that forward, they're obviously identifying a need, they're taking the time to write a report, to get in front of the board here and explain to us why these positions are needed and to highlight some of the potential risks of not filling those. But, one option the board could consider is deferring some of those for consideration to next year. And I've got three of them here identified, and it's in no way meant to minimize the importance of these positions or dismiss the arguments from staff, but just recognizing that we are facing some significant cost pressures. So one of them is the asset technician, important position, but I think there is some questions about how much that position is going to focus on take more of a regional focus as opposed to focusing on some of the electoral areas. I have discussed this with the CAO, and I think there would be value in putting that off for a year, which is not to say we shouldn't be focusing on asset management. If you look at the rest of the supplementals, we are setting aside a lot of money for asset management, including, for example, replacing the roofs at some of our major recreational facilities. The other one I've got here is the communications assistant. Again, important position. I know it's an area we're trying to enhance to kind of get more information out to our residents, but we are already pursuing the website redevelopment project, because that's another one we could consider for next year. The recycling facility attendant, I think we had like 3 votes on that position. We debated it for a long time. Important position. I think, most of us around the table here probably use Bings Creek facility on a regular basis. I can see a position like that having a lot of value, but we did approve 2 positions already, and my thinking was maybe we stick with the 2 and put that one off to another year. And then the 2 other items here, we approved, and this is one I hope we stick with, of course, is the additional supports emergency warming center of 70,000. However, we're paying through that for requisition. I discussed this with the CAO, and we could shift that from requisition to operating reserves. Again, 70,000 is not going to make a huge difference in the 16.35% increase, but it is something. And the other one here is, our economic development function. They obviously got a lot of really critical projects on their way right now. They do have 75,000 set aside in this year's budget for consultants. That's another one we could shift from requisition to operating reserves, which allow them to continue on with their work, but reducing that requisition by 75,000. And this brings us to probably 430 some odd thousand in savings, which again is not going to make a huge difference in terms of the overall budget, but it's something anyway.
Thank you. Ms. Bowen, and I've got some speakers on my speakers list.
Okay, through the chair to Director Douglas, did you talk about the website redevelopment?
I think he said hold off on the communications assistant
the
because we're already doing the website.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're
Yeah.
paying for that through operating reserve already,
Yeah.
so leave that one.
Okay. And the 70,000 for the rec center for the CCC, just taking it out of requisition, moving it to operating reserves, will post more, going back to 390 and upping the amount that goes through regional recreation. It just shifts from one to the other. That's all that one's really going to do. So, because of the way that operating reserves work with previous, it's a little bit of a calculation that needs to be done, so it just shifts from one to another.
But is there not a healthy operating reserve for
There is,
function
but
420?
it still is how regional rec works and how the split has to be figured out, that now the split will go on more burden onto 390, function 390 as a regional rec, of taking that 70,000, a combination of that 2/3 coming from that group. So it just moves it around. It still doesn't really drop it by 70,000.
I think Mr. Elzinga has some extra color to add to that, now that we've had the play-by-play.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Director Douglas. With the approved other supplementals for the Cowichan Community Center, it does drop below the minimum policy limit for operating reserve. So currently, without those other supplemental items, we would be healthy, but we've used a number of supplemental items using operating reserve, and we're now below the policy limit before we consider the emergency warming center.
So before I go back to the speakers list, Ms. Bowen, this is along the lines of how we ended up with a $2.4 million motion on the floor. I don't feel there's enough information to be able to do that today. I think staff's suggestion is that if we want to put forward research or what are the implications of these types of items, that they be put forward, reported back on the 6th with a special budget meeting. We can make those decisions again and then still be able to move toward adoption on March 14th. So I'm going to go through my speakers list, but just so we're clear, if staff were able to kind of re-pull the information on those items or others that directors would put forward, they could be brought forward to a special meeting on March 6th. Everybody check your calendars, and then that consideration and changes that might be made at that meeting could then be forwarded to the March 14th along with the budget bylaw for adoption. Okay, I have Director Nicholson and then Morrison.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that we should tweak the budget as best we can to, if anyone has good ideas, and Director Douglas obviously has thought about this. But from my perspective, the bottom line is that we need to invest in these services. We've got a lot of aging facilities. It's not cheap. This is not cheap. But we're investing in the status quo. And what I would be really interested in when we finish this whole budget cycle is having strategic conversation with the information about where we're pushing our money versus where we think we need to push our money in the future. Because if you really want to deal with this issue without raising requisition every year, you have to eliminate some services. And you can't have that conversation unless you have a conversation about, like, seriously what the priorities are, and then go out to the community and talk to them about it. And we don't seem to ever want to take that step. But if people are serious about, keeping taxes under control, which people seem to think that's what we're doing here, or trying to do, then that's what we need to do. Otherwise, we have these services that we're providing, and what we're talking about is a bunch of stuff coming at us in the future that we need to get ready for, and it's going to cost us more money. So, we should be talking about how we're going to manage through that discussion, I think.
Yeah, so you basically service level review, right? Function review, go to the community, say, what services are you willing to do without? What services do we need to invest more in?
Well, but within an informed way, because I really think there's issues coming at us that the community isn't really got their head around, because it's really scary.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. And so before Director Douglas was going to provide his suggestions, I was thinking of getting my hand up in the air to ask if these were going to be rehashes of things that have been debated or if they were going to be new items. And I bring this up because we acknowledge that doing things sort of on the fly or at last minute ain't a great way to do things. And when we have, there's a danger in this, and I've had correspondence from people that are saying, oh, are you going to do the old float the big number and then cut a bunch of stuff at the end to make it look like you've done something? And my point in this is we had a budget process that was fairly thorough, and we all spent all that time and effort reading the reports, looking at the reserve fund minimums, doing all of those things, and had a lot of gut-wrenching debate over these items. I don't feel any differently about them, because thinking back to the sense that when we debated them, the facility attendant position, we agonized over and we made that decision. And I think a last minute end of the process is not a good signal to each of us, because if we're going to invest in the time and effort and energy to make these decisions in the first place, in committee and earlier in the process, and we just know that we can go revisit them at the end anyways if we didn't come up with the result that we thought early on, that sort of sets a dangerous process. We had a pretty good process. I'm thinking we should stick with it as opposed to sending staff off with a whole bunch of last minute changes that we may actually regret in the long run, because we decided to invest in those positions because not only were they due, they were overdue. And I still feel the same way about them. Thanks.
Thank you. Not to take a different but similar tact, I spent so much time, we all did. I can't remember how many conversations, both at the table and at the lunch table, we agonized over the tax increase. In particular, because we know we were absorbing the impacts of the regional recreation referendum, and how, at the same time, many of the supplementals that we approved through much debate and agonization were ones that I feel like I remember from when I was first elected in 2014. And that might be an exaggeration, but definitely in the few years after that, where we were creating situations at our solid waste facilities that were necessarily maybe definitely not best practice. Contamination rates were higher, safety issues come forward. Year after year, staff bring us supplementals that we have denied. And what happens with that is that the cost to satisfy those needs grows. Some of those supplementals, and I don't have any right in front of me right now, but could have been $100,000 5 years ago. Now they're $145,000 for small capital works because those assets have degraded further through the lack of investment when staff said it's time to invest in those maintenance projects or maintenance capital. I did a similar exercise as Director Douglas, and I couldn't find enough substantive change to make what I felt was a rational impact on the budget, considering that although folks on one hand will say, don't borrow money, you should be saving, and then when it comes to a budget that we have a reserve policy in place, which is exactly the kind of savings so that we don't have to budget for borrowing at whatever the interest rates are for municipal borrowing now, when those expenses come due. So save for a rainy day, don't be borrowing, and then don't be saving, put that off. If there were something, a major initiative that could be changed this year that would make a substantive increase, I'd be happy to support it. I am happy to support the board if we want to put forward a list of items to consider at a special board meeting next week. I'm happy to do that. It's really up to our colleagues that sit around this table. So at this point, I would look for a motion with specificity, because we need to give that information to staff so that they can prepare that information for us to properly consider and deliberate. Yes, it would be rehashing items. I appreciate your perspective, Director Morrison, but here we are, and that's our job. So do we have a motion? I'll let that hang out there for a bit because I want to make sure we're sure. Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I know not everyone is speaking, but I'm not sensing an appetite around the board.
Well, I think one way to test the appetite is to put forward your list and make a motion that we consider a special board meeting with those items and see if you get a seconder and let the board vote on it.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, would
Yeah.
that be more appropriate as a referral motion to the next meeting?
No, because we need the specificity. So it would be a notice of motion to be.
With those items?
With those items.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Director Douglas.
I guess the challenge for me, Chair, is having those 4 items not adding up to a whole lot in terms of reducing some of the pressures of the budget. It seems scheduling a special meeting just for that may not be the best use of time and resources for the whole board and staff. Like, is there any indication any other directors have any other suggestions for trimming the budget, or are we going to be scheduling a whole meeting just to discuss 4 items that I've come up with on my list that we've already spent quite a bit of time, as Director Morrison pointed out, debating these over the last couple months?
I can only speak from my perspective. I went through a similar exercise and I couldn't justify that those changes would either align with what I feel is good policy around things like reserves. And I appreciate the thought of mitigating, even if it's $75,000 of a tax increase, but then not, pulling from reserves that are there for a reason. I couldn't find things that on the balance of all probabilities, I felt was the appropriate thing. I think more importantly, we do have to look to how we find better fiscal sustainability over the coming years and set our priorities in a way that align with what's really important, because there are things coming around, requirements around solid waste. You put a solid waste management plan through the province, they stamp it and approve it, liquid waste management plans, all those things. You're required to make those necessary investments to achieve and fulfill the commitments you've made under those plans. And I know those costs are all coming down the tracks at us. So I think cutting today only compounds the increases that are going to be baked in the future. But that's only my perspective. I'm happy to consider and take, whether it's 15 minutes or 2 hours, to consider where there might be savings if that's what the board decides to do. I have Director Wilson, then McClinton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's interesting, again, what you're saying about the stuff that's coming down the post to us. Again, we've talked about it before, of the amount of downloading, and we'll go back to that every now. How much pressure are we putting, or how much more pressure can we put on the province and the feds, or whoever is pushing all this stuff our way, to say enough?
Well, I can only speak to resolutions at all of the conferences, the amounts of letters that we write, knowing full well generally what the response will be. It goes back to, again, 2016, I think, strong fiscal futures. Last year at FCM, it was like the theme of the entire conference. The speakers list was based on the fact that the federal government is also putting pressure on local governments that's unsustainable across the country, that pushing local governments to go far outside their core mandates of, water, sewer, roads. Well, not in electoral areas, that's Modi. Don't want to get you guys into that mess.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there's so many costs, not just the direct costs, but also the costs to organizations that aren't properly set up to manage social issues or emergency management. And we're doing a great job. I think I compliment our staff. We have great staff, but those hires around things like emergency management, Cowichan, were part of adjusting and getting ready to fulfill legislative requirements that are required under provincial law,
Yeah.
right? I'm happy to continue to advocate on those issues. Every time we get put another download on us, we write the letters, we ask for the meetings, we go to the conferences. I'm not sure there's anything else we can do other than continue to talk about it publicly and ask our citizens to also go to the federal and provincial government representatives and say enough. Property taxpayers can't handle it, and if also income taxpayers can't handle it, then we all need to sort of sing from the same song sheet.
And if I might have a follow-up there, this is good because you mentioned the word reality. I don't think the province or the feds are living in the same reality as we are, because we've been told before, we're the boots on the ground. We're the ones that have to face exactly what happened here today. And that's going to happen more, I'm sure. But how do we make it clear to the electorate? And this is something we have to do. We are responsible for an awful lot of stuff here, but there's stuff being pushed on my shoulders and your shoulders that we have no choice but to push onto their shoulders. How do we then say enough is enough is enough? It's all very well writing letters.
Yeah.
There comes a point where letters don't work anymore. And there has to be something we can do. I know UBCM is one of them, maybe.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
are they taking any notice of us?
Well, we had ministry finance meetings in September, talking about this, bringing in the strength of colleagues around the province and across the country, and reflecting on that now it's a federal issue as well, that municipalities across the country. The other big thing is that in times like this, federal and provincial governments can run a deficit for a year or two while the economy's not strong to mitigate the burden on taxpayers. We can't. So what happens is in the up and down of economic times, we can't say, a deficit budget's okay this year because 3 years from now when the economy's humming again, we'll make that back. Now you can argue whether or not certain parties or governments will make it back, but we don't have the same fiscal management wiggle room that other levels of government have. So not a question we can answer today, but I can guarantee you that I think that's pretty top on when we talked about our advocacy list, that fiscal realities that are faced by local governments before all of this started, before COVID, before homelessness issues and things like that were, sort of pushed to the top of our list. It was infrastructure deficit. We haven't made, those infrastructure deficits are getting bigger every year. And the federal and provincial governments aren't helping us with that to the level they need right now either. So it's a good, long conversation. Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we need a special committee, and I just want to elaborate. The process we went through, I thought, was detailed. There was a lot of compromise. Sure, for my personal area, there's definitely some things I would cut, but for the betterment of only my area, we're a region, and there's give and take with everything. While personally I would have liked to see the park acquisition fund come down lower, there's clearly a demand in the community for it. And, while I personally believe that keeping money in our constituents' pockets. They know what's the best to do with it. We also have a responsibility to deliver services that we're mandated to deliver. And, you know, I feel, well, I'm going to be having some very difficult conversations with my constituents. I do feel like I have all the tools to answer those questions and to describe how we got to that number. And that comes with the role. It's going to be, you know, a few weeks of some uncomfortable conversations with neighbors, but you know, I want to thank Director Douglas for the effort putting it forward. Personally, I feel comfortable moving forward. Obviously, I'll spend some time thinking about it over the next 2 weeks, but as I sit here today, that's where I sit.
Thank you. Director Martman, did I miss anyone? Director Martman.
Earlier on we did a workshop where we talked about our styles and what we're comfortable with, and you know, I'm the kind of person that, like, I'll chew on this forever. But that's me, and I do hear others saying, you know, you got to have a process, follow it, finish it, and I'm really a big process person. But I do know that one of the things that comes up with my community, and on this topic particularly, where's the internal changes that you guys are going to make? What are you really going to think about? And while I'm not sure I'm going to change any of my thinking on these 5 positions, I think the process to go through it is not unhealthy. I think it's actually healthy. And it sort of reminds me back of the regional growth strategy piece of, you know, it was over by the time it was sent to us. Well, this isn't over. This isn't over until we sign off on the final budget. And so, and I don't want to put staff to a lot of extra work or not, but I think I would have a hard time explaining to my community, why didn't we come back and consider these things one more time if they have potential? And I think there's potential, whether or not anything happens or not, the potential is there, and I would explore that. But that's my personality. So understanding, I will chew on things until someone tells, take away my bone. So there we are.
Thank you. Director Abbott.
I share Director Martman's sentiments, Chair. And Director Douglas has done some good research. They may not be as large a decrease as some of our electorate would like to see, but I think it's worthy of having a healthy debate, and perhaps over the next 7 days, there may be some other areas that we could look at.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think over the next 7 days, we can't come to the next meeting with more green bananas. They need to be here today.
Okay.
So that staff can do the appropriate research and present the correct information to the board to make a decision at that 1 week's time. So, you know, we can consider those, which were on my list, but I discarded based on a more fulsome analysis, but I'm happy to do it again. Director Morrison.
Just real quickly, you know, I think a lot of what Director Nicholson had said about the positioning and looking at how we invest, what expenditures we have is really important. And I think the pre-2025 budget discussion that we have is going to be the critical one. I'm sensing that this budget for the most part is done because I think we debated thoroughly and extensively, but I look at that next step for the next budget as the critical part that we all have to next turn our minds to. It's the investment versus the reward that I don't see there in back the redebate. That's all.
Thank you. Am I done my speakers list? Thank you. I do want to reflect on, I think a thematic thing is that there's a really interesting opportunity, and I think that finding things like efficiency and focus and direction on what's most important, anticipating what's coming down the road, is a really constructive and important exercise. especially if it's seen as a pursuit of excellence by both the board and staff, that we kind of like work together as a team and like, let's really find out where the focus is and then reach out to community members and find out where we find those focus groups and items and inform folks on what's coming down the road, so that we're all really well informed heading into future budget processes. I'm really supportive of that, but again, on the analysis of what we've done this year, I'm really quite proud of the work that was done and the investments we're making in the future of the community, but I'm going to hang it out there one more time. If someone wants to make a motion, this is your opportunity. We've had a lot of discussion without a motion on the floor. Just asking somebody to make a motion, or we're going to move towards our next item on our agenda. We can't adjourn until we go through question period. Seeing none, Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This moves us to question period. The question period is an opportunity to offer the public to ask a question regarding the business of the CVRD. The question period allows for an allotment of 15 minutes. It's comprised of two parts. The first is reserved for questions directly related to agenda items that were before you today. If there's time remaining, questions may be on a matter of public interest related to and in the CVRD jurisdiction. Each questioner is permitted to ask one question plus one follow-up question related to the answer. The question must be truly a question and not a statement of opinion or speech. In addition, we just remind that anybody that asks a question should ask in a polite, calm, and courteous manner using respectful language, civility, and decorum.
And so we're open for question period. I just want to thank those who remained here late for your listening and for your respectful conduct, so I really do appreciate that. So we do have question period open, and feel free to ask your question and follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and directors. My question is very simple. I'm asking, what is the amount in the CVRD Reserve Fund for parks? I don't know what you name it, if it's parks, whatever, but the Reserve Fund, what would that amount be?
I will follow up and answer at our next meeting. I don't know if Ms. Bowen has it. Usually as the chair, I don't ask staff, but that's a pretty straightforward one. In the Regional Parkland Acquisition Fund presently.
And I would have
You
thought...
ask your follow-up while we see if we can get that answer for you.
Well, oh, good. I thought it would be available, given today's topic.
Yeah, I can't, Joyce, you can imagine, like I said, sorry, Ms. Benson.
Nope. That's okay.
My brain is getting a little frazzled. It's been a lot of numbers floating around, but I can't remember the exact amount right now. Karen has it? Thank you. Oh. Regional Parkland Acquisition, unless Ms. Bowen has it. Ms. Bowen, just tell me and I can say it through the microphone.
There's two amounts.
Yeah.
The capital reserve is just sitting as 2.9
Million, yeah.
capital reserve, and operating reserve is sitting at an uncommitted amount of 93,000.
93,000.
These are both on the website. This is all.
Yeah.
I'm asking the question because I'm here and it's relevant to today's
Yep.
entire, so I didn't quite, I heard a
2.9 million in the capital reserve and 92,000 in the operating reserve.
So it's not peanuts.
Yeah, we have, yeah. Good follow-up. It's not peanuts.
I thank you.
Thank
To
you.
me, that to me is the basis of what we're doing here today, and this part of it, the parkland acquisition. Where do you start? If you don't have a starting point, how do you know where you're going?
Thanks.
Or what's needed? So the missing, wow.
Thanks.
You guys are rich. Thank you. You've already got a big start. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi,
Good
Ms.
day,
Smith.
Chair. I have a question. I heard Director Douglas indicate that there was business cases that were brought to the board is how you deliberated and came to your decisions on different functions. So I'm asking, where is the business case for the board Saltaire Recreation $281,600 loan?
Authorization. I can get the background information. That's information that was discussed some time ago. I know it's a project that's been on the books for some time. I'd have to go back because I think it might even be more than a year ago. That was a proposed project for that facility, but I can find out for you.
So if there's a proposed project, then during the meetings, that summary should have been, that case study should be there.
I appreciate that. I can look for it, and I'll get it back to you at the next board meeting. That's what we do when we don't have the information handy.
And I do have a different question.
You
So
got your
if-
2 questions, but I'll give you
Oh,
one
no,
more.
mine was follow-up, that one. First one, second one was follow-up.
Yeah, you get one and a follow-up, what you got, but I'll give you another one.
So I'm going to challenge you because you're the brain when it comes to a lot of the process involved in Robert's rules.
Mm-hmm.
So when a motion is to be reconsidered,
Mm-hmm. Is this the email that you sent?
well, it's a question.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a question. So under Robert's rules, when a motion is reconsidered, the person who brings forward the reconsideration motion is to be the person that was in favor of the original motion. So is it changed now that that's no longer the rule, or?
Or under the Local Government Act, the chair, under the sections mentioned, can bring an item back for reconsideration regardless, and that's the motion which I brought it forward under the report of the chairperson today.
Yes, today, but the original reconsideration motion that was from the 8th of February, that was done at the 8th of February.
The one that failed or incorrectly failed?
Well, at the time, you allowed it to be brought back.
You mean the further increase motion? That wasn't a reconsideration motion, that was a further motion.
24078, that motion.
078, the motion to reconsider, because
Yeah.
076 was the additional.
Right.
I don't have that in front of me. I'm
So
sorry.
I'm just asking if Robert's rules didn't apply to that particular reconsideration.
I don't even remember what 078 was. The
Well,
only-
it was the reconsideration. So if a motion is reconsidered.
The motion to reconsider-
Under Robert's rules.
Right.
It indicates that
The chair
whoever
also has the prerogative within the meeting to bring a motion to reconsider forward. It doesn't have to be prevailing or
It was,
against.
but the motion was brought forward by Director McClinton, and it was seconded by Director Morrison. And both of them had voted opposed to the original motion.
Yeah, like I already said, Ms. Smith, I
Point
don't
of
have
order,
that
Mr.
answer
Chair,
handled
are we
yet.
debating or
No,
questioning?
I'm just trying to figure out
Ms. Smith.
which
Point of
rules
order.
we
I've given you
hear
what I
you
can.
move
Thank
under.
you. I've given you what I can today. I will follow up with staff and they will respond to your email. We have a couple minutes left in
Yeah,
question period.
Just very quickly, Board, thank you very much for your work today and your work that you put in every day. I think we saw today the value of taking a step back, coming back a couple weeks later, and the reconsiderations that happened on an issue that people, they changed their feelings about. They saw what their constituents felt, their original votes changed, ideas changed, decisions changed. When you're saying that you respect your process, I respect your process too. But a couple of directors saying that there's not a lot of interest in meeting on budget issues again.
Just going to ask for your question.
I would ask you, are 3,000 signatures in 10 days not interest enough in looking again at this budget before it's approved? And that's my question.
Thank you. I can only answer for myself. I looked at the items that were included in our budget and I feel that the right decisions were made. So from my perspective, the best decisions were made for the future of the valley and all the residents in it based on the budget that we've moved forward with.
Okay, thank you for your
Thank you.
answer.
Okay, thank you. I have a severe hearing problem, so I'm not sure that, I just might have missed something here. But are there two motions still left on the table here?
Not that I'm
With
aware of, no.
respect to the five-year financial plan?
Those were referred to the next meeting because there was changes made during the meeting today that require those bylaws to be updated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That's my first question. My second question is, what kind of plans do you have to communicate to those people who are so concerned about the tax increases in the CVRD, especially the people who signed the petition, but the number of people who came here today? So what is the communication plan to let them know what the CVRD is doing in response? That's my question.
Generally speaking, we have communications materials that are issued once the budget is adopted. As a regional district board member and chair, you'll know that that's kind of pretty standard process. There'll be, what's that?
No, I do.
Yeah. Some reflection on that based on what the final budget is that's adopted. I'll work with our financial services staff and get input from the directors on how we explain sort of the different elements of the budget. And then, as you know as well, because every area has different implications based on the functions they participate in, more detailed explanation is provided through the directors and then through the notices that are sent to all of the taxpayers when that time comes.
This is just to clarify my question about what is the communication going to be about your stepping back to take a look at the budget again. That's all. So you are going to have another meeting.
Yeah, the bylaws based on the budget decisions to date will be presented at our next meeting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a couple minutes left. Ms. Kaufman, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Susan Kaufman from Satlam. Thank you. I know this has been a really long and trying process for you. What I would like to ask is not dissimilar to what the previous gentleman said. I think there needs to be an easier communication with the public around the budget and what specific proposals are coming forward, not just a referral to the finance page, because as a layperson, your eyes glaze over really quick. So I think somehow, some way that if staff and maybe some of the public could get together and say, how can we work for something like that? And that's my question.
Yeah,
How can we do that?
Yeah, I think there was some conversation this year about returning to the in-person community meetings around the budget during the budget process. I think that would be constructive.
It would.
There was poor attendance this year at the online ones. There was great attendance during COVID, obviously, because everybody was locked up. And there was some sort of continual support for that shortly after that. But this year we got poor uptake. So we got to have that feedback cycle earlier in the budget process, helped inform the discussions and debate. In previous years prior to COVID, I heard some discussion about that returning for future years based on this year's process. So I would support something like that. Of course, that'll be decisions of our colleagues, but perhaps returning to sort of group in-person meetings regarding the budget during the budget process, kind of, in that like early January timeframe, or in the January timeframe where it gives us time to get input and make changes that are more substantive. But again, that'll be a decision that we make coming out of this process, but based on the learning so far, that'd be something I'd be supportive of and recommending.
That's good, and realizing not everybody can make the meetings, so that's why, something that's in the social media pages or newspapers. I think it would have gone a long way this time to have that with the regional recreation. Referendum
absolutely.
would have made a big
Thank
difference
you.
for a lot of people. Thank you.
All right, seeing no one else, Mr. Robbins?
That brings you to the end of your meeting, a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Martman. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.